LoveLore Library. Chapter 12:16. Because of his amnesia, he didn't want to get too close to anyone. When he came back this time, the other people in the Sun-Moon sect didn't notice anything strange about him. But this little disciple, wasn't she very close to him in the past? He had forgotten about her. In her eyes, it was as if he was evil beyond redemption. Her attitude towards him was also a bit strange. It wasn't like how a disciple would treat her master. How could he have allowed her to be so close to him in the past? He quietly looked at her and found that he couldn't bear to see her in a mess. He casually tidied up her wet hair and her messy clothes. Ning Xuemo fiercely slapped his hand away and screamed, "Don't touch me, you liar." Then, as if she didn't have any more strength, her hand fell down powerlessly. Her eyes slowly closed. Shinjuli was stunned. He checked her breathing. It was still very stable. She seemed to have fallen asleep. He didn't think that she could fall asleep immediately after throwing a tantrum. He carried her and floated in the sky for a long time. In the end, he silently sent her back to the side hole. He put her on the bed. When he was about to leave, she suddenly hugged his arm. Turning around, he saw that she was hugging him unconsciously. Her eyes were still closed, and her mouth seemed to be mumbling something. Shinjuli quietly listened. So cold. Great God, I'm so cold. Shinjuli then realized that her entire body was still wet. His eyebrows slightly furrowed. With a flash of white light, Ning Xuemo's clothes became dry. He turned around and wanted to pull his arm away, but he saw that Ning Xuemo suddenly burst into tears. She cried like an abandoned child, sobbing, "How could you forget me? How could you do this?" Shinjuli quietly looked at her. Seeing her tears, he felt his heart begin to hurt again. He had never seen her cry before. This strong girl was crying as if she had suffered a great grievance. Shinjuli's heart slowly clenched into a ball. And didn't he just see her twice? How could he be sure that she had never cried before? Shinjuli suddenly thought of this question. The gaze he looked at her with became a little complicated. What was his relationship with her in the past? Master and disciple relationship. But what part of her behavior was befitting of a disciple? And when she hugged his arm, he didn't feel disgusted at all. If it was someone else, he would have flung that person away before they could even touch his sleeve. Ning Xuemo turned over on the bed and finally let go of his arm. He actually felt a little disappointed. Since when was he so intimate with his disciple? What did he take her for back then? Stay with him. Ning Xuemo mumbled. Shinjuli raised his eyebrows and asked, "What did you say?" Ning Xuemo didn't say anything. She closed her eyes and slept soundly. Shinjuli felt that his behavior was a little silly. He actually talked to a drunkard in a serious manner. Therefore, he glanced at Ning Xuemo and turned to leave. "If I had known that you would treat me like this, I would have stayed at Shuilan's place." What? Shinjuli, who had walked to the door, suddenly turned back. The white light in his hand flickered, as if he was going to throw it out and hit the person on the bed in the next second. Finally, the white light dissipated. He stood by the bed and looked down at Ning Xuemo. He said coldly, "No." Ning Xuemo seemed to have heard him. She tactfully stopped talking and slept obediently. Chapter 12:17. After Shinjuli said this, he turned around and left. When Ning Xuemo woke up the next day, she felt dizzy. She had a splitting headache and her brain felt like it was filled with paste. She shook her head and felt a wave of dizziness. Her vision darkened and she almost fell off the bed. What happened to her? Did she get beaten up by someone? Ning Xuemo thought for a long time. Her slow brain finally started to work. She finally remembered that she drank a lot of alcohol, so she was drunk. Ning Xuemo felt that it was a little strange. She had always been able to drink 1,000 cups. Previously, when she was in the special agent team, those people were all good drinkers. They came one by one to force her to drink and she got them all drunk. After drinking, she could even go on a mission with a smile. But now she was drunk, and quite drunk. She almost couldn't remember how she came back last night. She sat on the bed for a while, trying to clear her head. However, her head was in a daze and she couldn't remember anything. She shook her head. No, she had to go out for a walk. This was probably the bad effect of a hangover. She might be able to clear her head after getting some wind. Ning Xiaoma casually ran her fingers through her hair. When she turned her head, she saw 2 stacks of clean clothes on the low cabinet at the head of the bed. Her eyes lit up and she hurriedly took off her wrinkled dress and changed into a new one. When she went out and the wind blew, she felt a little better. She wandered around aimlessly, passing through the flowers and brushing the willows. Unknowingly, she walked to Tianyin Cliff. She stood on Tianyin Cliff and felt that her dizzy head seemed to have cleared up a little. Bits and pieces of what happened last night after she got drunk flashed through her mind. She hugged her head and couldn't remember anything. She tried to organize her memory. Last night, Yilu Jinghen and a group of senior brothers led a large group of people to throw a party for her. Then, she drank with Helian Xiao, and then, her body suddenly stiffened. She seemed to have been brought back by the Almighty and then thrown into the water by him. The feeling of fear and helplessness in the water was too strong. She could still remember it. She pursed her lips. The Almighty was really heartless to her after he lost his memory. He seemed to have a special fondness for drowning her. Before he lost his memory, he had drowned her once, and after that, he did it again. It seemed that in this space-time, she was not only fated to fall from a high altitude, but also fated to be with water. An ill-fated relationship. She had already been drowned 4 times. She tried her best to suppress the negative emotions in her heart and began to divert her attention. Oh right, when I was drinking with Helian Xiao last night, Helian Xiao seemed to have mentioned Little Apple. He said that Little Apple had gone out to look for her and hadn't returned yet. Ning Xiaoma did not give up and tried to contact Little Apple in her mind. She chanted Little Apple's name several times, but there was still no response. She pursed her lips. The 10-year contract had ended, and the telepathy between them had indeed been broken. She wondered if such an innocent divine beast like Little Apple had been bullied during its days of wandering outside. If it couldn't find her, it would probably return to the Sun-Moon sect by itself, right? Then why didn't he come back? He was already back, so why wasn't Little Apple back yet? Could there have been an accident? Ning Xiaoma's heart started to panic. No, she had to go out and look for it. Now that Kirin was so famous in the Tianxi continent, as long as it walked around in a certain country, that country would definitely spread all kinds of news about it. Chapter 12:18. Little Apple. He was probably cursed to death by you, Momo. He didn't come back for 10 years. Maybe he was captured by someone, killed or imprisoned. A little girl's voice absent-mindedly sounded in her heart. Her voice was calm and unhurried, as if she was talking about the weather. Ning Xiaoma's hands clenched. Sure enough, as soon as her psychological defenses loosened, this little devil took the opportunity to run out and disturb her. She looked at the billowing sea of clouds below the cliff and looked at the golden sun in the distance. Her mood calmed down quite a bit. She said indifferently, "You're wrong, but I don't intend to spend time telling you what's right, so shut up. Don't come out to make your presence known." The little loli in her heart, the little loli's voice suddenly became gentle again, making people's hair stand on end. Momo, you're really pitiful. Right now on this peak, only I can chat with you. Shinjioli has lost his memories and is doing his best to torment you. Little Apple is looking for you in who knows which corner. Hellion Xiao was implicated by you and had to go to the cliff of reflection to reflect on his mistakes for a year. Momo, you're really worthy of the reputation of being a jinx. You were born to become a devil. If you don't become a devil, you'll continue to implicate the people around you. Ning Xuema ignored her and slowly took a step forward. If she moved a little more, she would flip over. However, she was very calm. She calmly looked at the billowing sea of clouds and calmly threatened the little lowly. If you jump out and disturb me again, I'll let you have a taste of the drop tower. The little lowly who was threatened again finally exploded. She screamed, "Jump! Go ahead and jump. If you jump, you'll be smashed to pieces. But Momo, let me tell you, as long as your soul doesn't die, I'll exist forever with the world. At most, I'll just have to start over again." She suddenly went silent because Ning Xuema unexpectedly moved forward a little more without hesitation. This time, she only needed a little more strength and Ning Xuema would flip over. Ning Xuema's lips curved into a smile as she unhurriedly asked, "Why don't you continue?" "I'm listening." The little lowly finally went silent. After a while, she said faintly, "If you die, all of this will be over. Shinjioli will no longer remember you." Ning Xuema's lips curved into a mocking smile. "Who cares?" The little lowly was stunned. She didn't understand what kind of language this was and was stunned for a long time without saying anything. Ning Xuema stood there and looked down. A wave of dizziness came over her. She seemed to stumble slightly. When she finally steadied herself, she suddenly heard a cold voice behind her. "What are you doing?" It was Shinjioli. Why was he so elusive? Shocked, she lost her footing and accidentally fell down. Ning Xuema wanted to curse out loud. She originally wanted to scare the inner demon little lowly, but she didn't expect to be scared by Shinjioli. Her psychokinesis was sealed and she couldn't use any strength. She could only wait for the Almighty to save her. He definitely wouldn't leave her in the lurch. Ning Xuema subconsciously raised her head and looked up. Shinjioli stood quietly at the edge of the cliff. There wasn't a trace of fluctuation in his eyes and his face was indifferent. It was as if the person who had just fallen was just an insignificant ant. Ning Xuema opened her eyes wide in disbelief and stared at him. Shinjioli just looked at her indifferently and then moved away. Chapter 12:19. Ning Xuema felt as if she had been splashed with a bucket of cold water on a cold night. She felt cold from head to toe. Her blood vessels felt as if they had been frozen. He actually didn't save her. Ning Xuema fell through layers of clouds. The strong wind messed up her hair, causing it to dance in the air. Layers of fog covered her eyes. Shinjioli's face gradually blurred until it could no longer be seen. Ning Xuema stubbornly stared at the sky. No matter how strong the wind was or how bright the sun was, she kept her eyes wide open. She didn't believe that he would let her fall to her death in front of him. But Ning Xuema looked behind her and desperately found that the ground was rapidly enlarging. At the moment when she was about to land, Ning Xuema silently closed her eyes. She bit her lips until they were white and her fingers were clenched tightly. She suddenly understood a terrible truth. He and she were originally heaven and earth apart. He was a god above the clouds, emotionless and desireless. She was an insignificant person in the mortal world who was struggling to climb up. She wanted to stand side by side with God and look down on the mortal world. Therefore, she tried her best to climb up and fly towards the clouds. In the end, she finally fell from the high clouds, fell through layers of dreams, and returned to her original position. "Momo, you are so pitiful." "Shut up." She was still more than 10 meters away from the ground. She was about to hit the protruding rocks below. Suddenly, her waist was tightened. Then, she was pulled up in an instant. Just like when she fell, Ning Xuema quickly passed through layers of clouds. But unlike before, she was now ascending. Layers of clouds were removed. Shinjuli's face gradually became clear. He still looked indifferent. He lowered his head and looked at her. There was no emotion in his eyes, but there was a green vine in his hand. In the end, he saved her. Ning Xuema was placed at a place far away from the cliff. Her face was pale and she was frightened. After a few deep breaths, her wildly beating heart slowly calmed down. "Why did you jump off the cliff?" Shinjuli's faint voice came. Why did she jump off the cliff? Wasn't it because they were frightened by his sudden appearance? Ning Xuema opened her mouth. She wanted to angrily explain, but when she saw his indifferent handsome face, she didn't say anything in the end. The corner of her mouth hooked up into a smile, and then she remained silent. The despair she felt when she fell from the sky was still lingering in her heart. That kind of sadness, despair, and discouragement swept over her like a tidal wave. The powerful negative emotions had almost completely enveloped her, to the extent that she still hadn't recovered from her shock. She told herself that he had saved her after all, so what was there to be dissatisfied about? However, Shinjuli's indifferent expression of looking on with folded arms still hurt her. That kind of expression felt like he was looking at a stranger who had reaped what he had sown. Because he cared, it was easier for him to be hurt by insignificant things. The closer they were to each other, the higher their demands would be. She placed him in her heart as the number one person. He treated her like a stranger and looked at her coldly. She was asking for too much now. She closed her eyes and didn't say anything. Shinjuli looked at her pale face and closed eyes. He felt a little uncomfortable, as if his heart was being pricked by a needle. After a pause, he spoke again with a cold voice, "Answer." Ning Xuema looked at him and turned to leave. Her body froze. She was fixed there again. Chapter 12:20. Shinjuli slowly walked up to her from behind. His face was solemn. "Answer me." Ning Xuema's lips curled into a faint smile. "Master, if I don't answer, are you going to pin me down for another day and night?" Shinjuli. Wasn't this disciple of his a little too arrogant? She was like a little hedgehog, constantly pricking people with her spikes. Although he didn't have any memories of his past, he subconsciously felt that his standards for accepting disciples seemed to be the gentle and intelligent type. This little disciple obviously didn't meet his requirements. How on earth did he accept her? Perhaps it was because she was a female disciple, so he spoiled her a little. Who asked her to be so impudent? His expression became even colder as he stared at her with an icy gaze. It was as if he wanted to freeze her. "How dare you not answer your master's question?" With this coldness on his face, the domineering aura on his body became even stronger. Even the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped by a few degrees. Obviously, his bottom line had been touched by her. He really looked like an incomparably dignified master right now. No wonder everyone in the Sun Moon sect was so afraid of him. Even Yelu Jing and held her breath when she saw him like a mouse seeing a cat. So this was his original state. So this was his attitude when he was no longer special to her. Ning Xuema felt like a ball of wool was stuck in her heart. It was so stifling that her chest swelled up. Her smile became even wider, but her eyes were completely cold. "Master, you should know that I'm stubborn by nature. If I don't plan to say it, I won't say it no matter what. Even if you pin me down here, I won't say a single word." "Alright, I've said what I wanted to say. Master, please do as you please." No matter what kind of punishment, Xuema won't say anything more. "I'll definitely let Master be happy and satisfied with your punishment." Shinjuli, he left in a huff. Ning Xuema silently watched him leave. She was wondering why she couldn't say a single word of explanation no matter what. Why did she have to make him angry? Ning Xuema also felt very conflicted. She felt as if she had been split into two halves. Half of her wanted to throw herself into his arms and sleep. Half of them wanted to stand aside and provoke Shinjuli coldly. They wanted to see him get angry. That's right, she was taking revenge on him for leaving her in the lurch. He saved her, so did she have to be grateful and answer his questions? If she had treated him as an ordinary stranger, she would have thanked him for saving her life. But he wasn't. He was the one in her heart. If you want to blame someone, blame it on me loving you too much and caring about you too much. Ning Xuema closed her eyes and thought silently. After spoiling her to the point that she was out of control, he simply forgot about her. Chapter 12:21. She stood there for what seemed like a century, as if she had been petrified. After a while, she pursed her lips and turned to leave. Suddenly, a cold voice came from the main hall. It was like a stream in early spring, but it still carried the chill of winter. Come in. Ning Xuema was stunned. Her slow brain worked hard. She seemed to have heard Shinjuli's voice. She turned to look at the main hall, but there was no one in front of the main hall. She waited quietly for a long time. There was only the sound of the wind around her. Was she hallucinating? Ning Xuema shook her head and continued to walk forward. This time, the voice from the main hall was even colder. It had completely entered the cold state of midwinter. Come in. So Shinjuli really called her. It wasn't her hallucination, Ning Xuema thought dizzily. She stepped in and went around the screen. She saw Shinjuli standing quietly in the middle of the main hall, looking at her expressionlessly. Ning Xuema looked at the comfortable chairs in the main hall and then looked at Shinjuli. She didn't understand why he didn't sit on the chairs but insisted on standing. She spoke faster than her brain could react. She asked doubtfully, "Why do you insist on standing when there are chairs available?" After saying that, she realized that she had asked such a boring question. What did it have to do with her whether he was willing to stand? What was wrong with her today? Why didn't she keep her mouth shut? She just blurted out everything. Shinjuli's expression seemed to be blank for a moment. The words that he had prepared were all interrupted by her nonsensical question. He couldn't say anything else. Could he say that he had been standing behind the screen and quietly watching her until she came in? Then he walked back to the middle of the main hall. Shinjuli decided not to argue with her. He looked up at Ning Xuema and waved his sleeve. Ning Xuema felt her body lighten. The psychokinesis in her body began to flow vigorously again. She breathed a sigh of relief. Her psychokinesis was finally back. Shinjuli asked indifferently, "What level is your falling moon immortal technique at?" Ning Xuema looked at him in confusion. The falling moon immortal technique? What the hell was this? She had never heard of it before. Could it be that at some point he had taught him something, and then he had forgotten it completely? Ning Xuema thought for a moment and said, "Master, I've never cultivated this before." Shinjuli. Was she really his disciple? Wasn't this the entry-level mental cultivation method of the 8th level? Could it be that he didn't have time to give her this mental cultivation method before he fell asleep? Forget it, it's not too late to cultivate now. He raised his hand and threw a book at her. Ning Xuema silently caught it. He said expressionlessly, "This book contains everything you need to cultivate. Memorize and comprehend this mental cultivation method tonight. Tomorrow, I will test you." Ning Xuema looked at the big book in her hand. It was thicker than a brick, and she felt even dizzier. She held the book in her hand and wanted to go out. "Stop," Shinjuli said. What was it this time? Ning Xuema turned around and looked at him. Master, do you have any other orders? Shinjuli's gaze fell on the book she was holding. His voice was slightly cold. This book was personally written by me. It took a lot of effort. You're just going to carry it like this. She was carrying the book as if she was carrying a garbage bag. There was no respect at all. Ning Xuema's head had been dizzy all this time. She really didn't pay attention to the way she was holding the book. Now that Shinjuli had reminded her, she didn't want to argue with him anymore. She held the book like she was holding a tribute. Is this okay? Chapter 12:22. Shinjuli was speechless. Ning Xuema waited for a long time, but did not hear Shinjuli speak again. She frowned. Was it not enough for her to support him like this? What else did he want her to do? Let her do it on top of his head. Why was he so fussy and difficult to please? The fire in her heart seemed to be about to burst out again, so she looked up at him. Master, do you have any other instructions? Shinjuli said lightly, you may leave. After thinking for a while, he added, memorize well. This time, Ning Xuema agreed readily. Yes, master. She turned around and strode away. After leaving the hall, Ning Xuema felt that her breathing was finally smoother. She always felt that there was a risk of suffocating when she was with Shinjuli. After he lost his memory, his spiritual pressure became frighteningly low. Everything was back to the beginning. Ning Xuema sighed. Did she have to start from the beginning? The more she thought about it, the more confused her mind became. She shook her head and felt that the road in front of her was swaying. She tried hard to suppress the dizziness, and only then did she feel better. When she returned to the room in the side hall, she casually threw the big book on the bed and threw herself on the bed. How could she memorize with her head in a daze? She should just wake up and memorize it. Anyway, she had a photographic memory and memorized it quickly. Ning Xuema thought in a daze. Countless scenes in her dream flew past, full of fantasy and warmth. On the ice field, the Almighty kissed her gently when she was not paying attention. Then, he said calmly, moi. Because of her fate as a jinx, she was at a loss. When she was gradually disappointed in herself, he held her in his arms, stroked her head, and told her, Xuema, don't be afraid. On Tianyin Cliff, they kissed each other goodbye. He stood in the wind and told her, Xuema, wait for me to come back. Every bit of it was the sweet memories she had with the Almighty. Ning Xuema stood quietly at the side. Looking at the once warm and colorful scenes, she felt a slight pain in her heart. How warm it used to be was how sad it was now. Why do people always remember the warmest and most beautiful memories when they are most frustrated? The sweetness of the past had now become a poison that pierced the intestines, but she was still willing to endure it. She held on tightly to that warm memory and healed the wound in her sleep. He was completely forgotten outside the dream, and from then on, he was just a passerby. Ning Xuema, who was sleeping, suddenly felt a strong wave of grief drowning her like a tide. She was so sad that she wanted to cry. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone. She could do nothing but tremble in pain. Just like the unforgettable despair in the Cloudwater Lake yesterday. Gradually, that wave of grief slowly passed. She heard a faint sigh from the bottom of her heart. Pitiful Momo, why do you have to? Ning Xuema ignored her and slept quietly. It was as if he had never had those dreams and never heard her words. Ning Xuema, who was sleeping, suddenly felt a bright light in front of her eyes. Before she could react, she heard a loud noise. What happened? She wanted to get up, but found that her body suddenly tilted. Her whole body rolled down uncontrollably. Then, she was suddenly in the air, and then fell to the ground with a bang. Ning Xuema was completely awakened by the fall. She jumped up in shock. Who is it? At the same time, she looked around. When she saw the situation around her, Ning Xuema was speechless. Her bed had collapsed, and the white light in the hands of the culprit had not dissipated. Chapter 12:23. Shinjuli's face was so gloomy that it looked like it could drip water. He flicked his sleeves, and Ning Xuema was suspended in the air along with the big book. Then, she shot out of the window like an arrow. Was he going to throw her down the mountain in a fit of anger? Then why did he bring the book with him? The book that was suspended in the air suddenly went into her arms. Ning Xuema hugged the big book, and her face was full of black lines. What was he trying to do? Ning Xuema's body nimbly bypassed the screen and went through layers upon layers of rooms before flying into an antique room. A calming incense stick was lit in the middle of the room, and the smoke was rising in spirals. Soon, the room was filled with a sweet fragrance, making people feel relaxed and happy. The room was full of books, all kinds of ancient books. Ning Xuema felt that she was thrown into the chair in front of the desk, and then the big book was slammed on the desk. Shinjuli walked in slowly, and his face was still gloomy. If you don't finish memorizing this book today, you won't be able to sleep. With a flick of his sleeves, Ning Xuema felt that her back was straightened instantly. Her head was looking straight ahead, and her arms were holding the book straight, just like a standard reading posture. At this moment, she could only move her arms, and the rest of her body was completely frozen. Ning Xuema was speechless. Shinjuli left in a huff. Ning Xuema could only helplessly pick up the book and read it. Her mind was currently in a complete mess. She stared at the words for a long time before finally realizing what she was reading. Moreover, the room seemed to be too dark, causing her vision to darken. Well, it must be because the night luminescent pearl had not been repaired for a long time. She needed to be brighter so that she could read properly. She subconsciously condensed a ball of fire in her hand, and used it as a torch beside the book. Now, it was finally brighter. Ning Xuema lifted her spirit and read for a while. After a while, her head started to feel dizzy again, and the words on the book started to shake, and then one of them split into two. She suddenly woke up. No, she had to finish memorizing this book, or there would be another storm tomorrow. She forced herself to focus on reading. 2 hours passed. Ning Xuema felt that the words on the book had turned into little black tadpoles, running around the book. Her head started to feel dizzy, the ground became uneven, and the luminous pearls turned from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. In the end, her vision turned black, and the book fell from her hand into the fire in her hand. The ancient book instantly burned. Ning Xuema stared at the book that was licked by the tongue of fire for a long time before she realized that the book was burned. She quickly extinguished the fire in her hand, but the book was still burning. She couldn't move her body right now, so she couldn't get water even if she wanted to. After thinking about it, she steeled her heart and directly used her hand to extinguish the fire. Her little hand was instantly scalded red, but because of her high fever, her senses were sluggish and she didn't feel it. By the time she put out the fire, only a corner of the book was left. Her hands were also burning with pain. Ning Xuema, she finally woke up. To be precise, she woke up in fright. God, she burned Shinjuli's precious book. Moreover, she was stuck here, so she couldn't run away even if she wanted to. When she was holding the book, he was still finding fault with it. If he found out that she burned the book, if Shinjuli saw it, he would definitely chop her up and throw her down the mountain. No, she had to run away before he found out. Ning Xuema began to concentrate on using her psychokinesis to attack the acupuncture points that were stuck. Chapter 12:24. Shinjuli was playing chess in the main hall when he suddenly smelled a strange smell. It was the smell of something burning. His heart sank. In a flash, he passed through countless rooms and arrived in front of the study. Ning Xuema was holding a corner of what looked like the remains of a book. When she saw him, she was shocked and then looked at him innocently. Shinjuli was speechless. The corner of the book in her hand should be the falling moon immortal technique that he threw to her not long ago, right? In such a short period of time, the falling moon immortal technique that he had painstakingly written for half a year had been reduced to a smoking corner. This girl actually burned the book. Burned it. Shinjuli's indifferent expression finally cracked. With a wave of his hand, Ning Xuema's acupoints were unsealed. Ning Xuema was stunned. Just as she was about to run, her body suddenly became light. Then, she flew out of the study and sat on the floor of the main hall with a bang. She fell and sat there with a grimace, unable to get up for a while. Shinjuli stood in front of her, looking calm before the storm. "Explain," he said. Ning Xuema hurriedly said, "I didn't do it on purpose. I saw that the room was too dark, so I started a fire." After she finished speaking, she seemed to feel that something was wrong, so she stopped. After a while, she finally understood. Oh God, playing with fire in the study. Was she a pig? How could she make such a stupid mistake? What was wrong with her today? Everything she did was out of place. Shinjuli's expression became even more gloomy. Ning Xuema's reason was really lame. Lighting a fire in the study. Was this disciple of his stupid? Would he believe this reason? Not to mention how bright the room was with luminous pearls, even if she thought it was dark, she couldn't have lit a fire in the study. This was a matter of common sense. His disciple must have deliberately burned the book because she was lazy and didn't memorize it. Then, she made up such a lame reason to fool him. Why didn't he think of a good reason to fool him? The air pressure around Shinjuli became even lower, as if the air was about to be frozen. His gaze was cold, as if it came from a snowy night. Ning Xuema, if you continue to act like a fool, I will expel you from the sect. Expelled from the sect. Now he wanted to expel her from the sect. Had she already fallen to such a state? He didn't even want her to be his disciple anymore. Was he going to throw her down the mountain and never see her again? How could he do this? Did she come back just to be bullied? Could he use amnesia as an excuse to wantonly hurt his former lover? She had had enough. Ning Xuema only felt a fire burning within her, burning her eyes to the point that her eyes emitted a fiery light. However, an ice-cold chill rose in her heart, freezing her heart into a lump of ice. Her heart could only tightly curl into a ball and tremble. She closed her eyes and tried to tell herself to be rational. Whether you believe it or not, this is the truth. Shinjuli's reply to her was to leave in a huff. His cold voice came from the air. Ning Xuema, you are really unreasonable. She was unreasonable? Very well, he could just ignore her and she could scram. Did he think she cared? The fire in her heart burned more and more fiercely, and her head became more and more dizzy. Fatigue spread to her entire body. She rubbed her eyebrows and said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, I am unreasonable, I am really unreasonable. You can also ignore me. Didn't you want to expel me from the sect? Fine, expel me." Chapter 12:25. As long as you're happy. I'm also tired. I don't want to play amnesia games with you anymore. She took out a pair of email piercers from somewhere and threw them in front of him. The email piercers fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. It was especially loud in the empty and quiet hall. Shinjuli's body seemed to stiffen, but Ning Xuema didn't care anymore. You gave this to me before. Now I'm giving it back to you. I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore. Ning Xuema said tiredly. She laid back on the bed, and darkness engulfed her like a tidal wave. Before she lost consciousness, she struggled to say one last sentence. Now you can throw me down the mountain. Shinjuli's heart suddenly jumped when he said that she would be expelled from the sect. He suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if he was annoyed and heartbroken. But he didn't take this feeling to heart. He knew that she would definitely apologize and beg him to let her stay. When he heard the person in front of him agree to it, the uneasiness in his heart instantly increased. He turned around and saw her throw the email piercers that were always with him to the ground. That crisp sound made his heart tremble. It was as if an alarm bell had rung. He felt that he was about to lose something important, his heart fiercely clenched. Seeing her weakly faint on the ground, he rushed up to her without thinking and held her in his arms. Only then did he feel that her body was burning up. It was strange. Other people would have a red face or abnormally pale face when they had a fever. But her little face didn't have any of those symptoms. It was still pink and tender. If he hadn't held her, he wouldn't have noticed that she was burning up like this. She had a high fever. No wonder her actions were so messy, no wonder she was hugging the book to sleep. No wonder she burned the book. Guilt, annoyance, and heartache swept over him in an instant. It made his hands tremble slightly. He picked her up and quickly walked to the bedroom. He gently placed her on the bed. He was too careless. She had a fever and was confused. She didn't even notice it. He placed his hand on her pulse and checked her pulse. After a while, Shinjuli raised his eyebrows slightly. She seemed to be going crazy. Coupled with the cold from last night, her high fever had not subsided. This girl didn't even pay attention to herself. She didn't have the self-awareness of a patient. Not only did she run around everywhere, she even ran to the cliff to feel the cold wind. Then, she suddenly jumped off the cliff and was forced by him to recite the book. It must have been hard on her to only faint now. There seemed to be another kind of power in her body that was filled with a dark aura. If he was not wrong, her chi deviation should be related to this dark and ominous aura. The most troublesome thing was that this power was tightly entwined with her body. Without using a special method, it was impossible to separate them. Moreover, this force was almost on par with Ning Xuema's own psychokinesis. Troublesome, very troublesome. Why did he accept such a troublesome disciple? There was a demon living in her body. She openly challenged him and threw a tantrum. When he asked her to expel him from the sect, she simply agreed and prepared to leave the mountain. She was so straightforward that Shinjuli felt like he was the one who was expelled from the sect. Although it was troublesome, his heart still ached when he saw her sad. When he heard that she wanted to cut off all ties with him, his heart was filled with endless fear. He really owed her in his previous life. When Ning Xuema opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was a black pill. She was startled and reflexively tried to dodge it. However, she didn't expect that her body didn't have any strength and could only retreat slightly. Chapter 12:26. The owner of the hand glanced at her indifferently. Why are you hiding? Then, not allowing her to refuse, he stuffed the pill into her mouth. Shinjuli's hand accidentally brushed against her lips. He paused, as if there was a small claw scratching his heart. The pill melted in her mouth, and it was extremely bitter. Ning Xuema had never eaten such bitter medicine in her life. It was as if she had used a ton of coptis to purify and refine it. What was worse was that she didn't even have the chance to spit it out. She tried to control her expression, but her little face couldn't help but scrunch up. After a while, she finally calmed down. What did you give me? Shinjuli's face turned cold, and his voice deepened. You? Is this how you talk to your master? Ning Xuema. Yes, she didn't use honorifics. She should have said you. However, didn't he already expel her from the sect? Why did he still call himself master? Speak. Shinjuli couldn't stand her silence. He would rather she speak a few more words, even if she refuted. Ning Xuemo leaned back and closed her eyes. Her expression was somewhat tired. Didn't I get expelled by your excellency? Did you forget? Shinjuli's eyes turned cold, as if he wanted to say something, but when he saw her pale face, he suppressed the anger in his heart and said coldly, "Are you so eager for me to expel you from the sect? I won't let you have your wish." He put the medicinal soup on the table, flicked his sleeves and left. Ning Xuemo opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling in a daze, not knowing what she was thinking. Suddenly, she looked down and saw that the bed under her had been replaced with a new one. The previous bed had been destroyed by Shinjuli, and she didn't know where he threw it. Looking at the sky outside, it seemed to be afternoon. Her gaze fell on the bowl of black medicinal soup on the table, and Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed with a complicated look. Did Shinjuli brew this for her? Although he was cold to her now, he still cared about her, right? After all, he hadn't expelled him from the sect. Ning Xuemo stood up. She didn't feel so dizzy anymore, and her thoughts were clearer. It was also because he had gone overboard yesterday. His fever had damaged his brain and burned the book that Shinjuli had painstakingly written for a year. If it were her, she would definitely fly into a rage and want to kill someone. When Shinjuli said that he wanted to expel her from the sect, she agreed without hesitation. Now that she thought about it, she was too reckless. If Shinjuli really expelled her from the sect in a fit of anger, she would not have the chance to reawaken his memories in the future. Ning Xuemo sighed. She was too impulsive. However, she did not intend to apologize to Shinjuli now. First of all, he was in a fit of anger now. If she went to him, she would definitely become cannon fodder. Second of all, she hadn't adjusted her mood yet. She hadn't figured out how to face Shinjuli, who was a cold and heartless master. Since she was bored, she would cultivate. Although she had accidentally burned the Falling Moon Immortal technique, she had at least read some of it. Although she had been dizzy at the time, she had subconsciously memorized the contents in front. Then, she would cultivate it first. After all, there was no harm in cultivating. Ning Xuemo sat down cross-legged and began to cultivate the Falling Moon Immortal technique quietly. Although she had advanced to level 8, there was always a sense of madness in her psychokinesis, which made Ning Xuemo restless. She couldn't control herself and wanted to destroy everything. Chapter 12:27. As her cultivation of the Falling Moon Immortal technique sped up, that trace of frenzy was finally suppressed. By the time Ning Xuemo opened her eyes, it was already evening. Her mood had calmed down quite a bit. He was currently in a state of amnesia, so she couldn't be too calculative with him. Perhaps she should go pay her respects. A disciple should pay her respects to her master. Ning Xuemo silently walked out of her room and slowly walked towards the main hall. Tianyin Peak was blooming with flowers all year round, and both sides of the path were randomly planted with exotic flowers and herbs. Any one of these flowers and herbs would be priceless treasures, but now they were casually growing here like weeds. Although they were casual, they were quite beautiful. Ning Xuemo looked at the flowers and plants along the way and felt much better. When she reached the main hall, she stopped in her tracks and a trace of hesitation flashed across her eyes. She didn't have a good impression of this main hall. First, she had been trapped for a night, and then she had burned the books. Also, if Yinshi came back again, would she lose control and splash the tea on her face? Forget it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Ning Xuemo's thoughts were in a mess. She stepped into the main hall and walked around the screen. There was no one in the hall. Shinjuli's favorite seat was empty, and the white pieces on the chessboard next to him were facing off against the black pieces. Where did he go? Could he have gone out with Yunxi? Ning Xuema pursed her lips as she recalled the scene of Shinjuli and Yunxi getting along in the restaurant. She stood in the main hall and waited for a while, but she still didn't see Shinjuli's figure. Ning Xuema was a little bored and was about to turn around and leave when she suddenly saw the chessboard next to her. Although the white pieces were facing off against the black pieces, the white pieces were already at a disadvantage. Ning Xuema looked at it carefully for a while before she raised her hand and picked up a white piece and placed it on the chessboard. Then, he closed his eyes and thought for a while before placing the black piece in another position. She used to play chess with Shinjuli. At this time, when she saw the black and white pieces fighting fiercely on the chessboard, she couldn't help but feel itchy. She sat down and began to concentrate on playing chess with herself. She imagined Shinjuli's style of playing chess in her mind. Then, she imitated his style when she played the black pieces. When she played the white pieces, she was herself and used her own way of thinking. Black and white intertwined. She kept switching roles and was having a lot of fun. When Shinjuli came out of the study, he saw Ning Xuema sitting not far away with her back to him. She was concentrating on playing chess. He slowly walked over and retracted his pressure. Chapter 12:28. Ning Xuema was shocked. She turned around, but there was no one there. She was puzzled. When she turned around, she saw Shinjuli sitting across from her. He looked at her calmly and said, "It's your turn." Ning Xuema was speechless. When did he come? Why didn't I notice him at all? It's easy to scare people when he comes and goes like a ghost. Shinjuli looked at her and frowned slightly. A chess game is like a battlefield. You can't be distracted. Ning Xuema calmed herself down and turned her attention back to the game. She looked at it for a while, then picked up a white chess piece and placed it somewhere. The crisp sound of a chess piece landing on the board continued for a long time. Ning Xuema was fully focused on the game. In the end, she lost by a few pieces. She raised her head and looked at Shinjuli. Shinjuli's expression had softened a little. It was as if he finally realized that his disciple had some redeeming qualities. At the very least, she was good at chess and could hold her own against him for so long. Ning Xuema was about to say something, but Shinjuli said calmly, "There are 3 games. If you win one game, I won't pursue the matter of you destroying the book." He waved his sleeves and the chess pieces on both sides were switched. Ning Xuema took the lead with a black chess piece. The two of them faced each other again. This game took a long time. Ning Xuema put in a lot of effort, but in the end, she still lost by a single chess piece. Ning Xuema rubbed her forehead. It was her last chance. The third game began. Ning Xuema used 200% of her energy to play. However, Shinjuli's style of chess was bold and powerful. Ning Xuema felt that she couldn't handle it. The black pieces were losing ground under the pursuit of the white pieces. It looked like she was about to be completely blocked. Shinjuli looked up at her and saw that she was being forced to retreat. She was frowning and deep in thought. He was slightly distracted. When he came back to his senses, the light in his eyes flickered. In the end, he pinched a black stone and placed it in the wrong place. Ning Xuema was out of breath. Just as she was about to lose, a sudden turn of events appeared, so she tried her best to seize this opportunity to counterattack. In the end, Ning Xuema narrowly won by a single point. The chessboard was like a battlefield. One moment of weakness would lead to complete defeat. Shinjuli looked at his defeated white piece in silence. Ning Xuema finally revealed a smile. "Master, thank you for letting me win. your disciple has won. Shinjioli looked at Ning Xuema's happy smile, and the last bit of discomfort in his heart dissipated. It didn't matter if he let her win. Perhaps he didn't want to punish her anymore. From the bottom of his heart, he finally showed a faint smile, got up and patted her head. Come back tomorrow. Again. Ning Xuema felt a headache coming. Countless of her brain cells had died in these 3 games. If she played again, wouldn't all of them die? Forget it. She would just treat it as practicing her chess skills. Ning Xuema nodded and looked up. Then I'll go back first. Shinjioli suddenly reached out to check her pulse. She subconsciously wanted to pull away, but she couldn't. In the end, she compromised and let him hold her hand. After a while, Shinjioli let go of her hand and looked at her lightly. Have you taken the medicine? Ning Xuema, she didn't. Shinjioli knew the answer when he saw her blank expression. His face darkened. Go back and drink the medicine. Come back tomorrow to get it. So there was still another bowl after drinking 1 bowl. Ning Xuema frowned almost imperceptibly and finally nodded. Okay. She looked up at Shinjioli and saw that he didn't have any other orders, so she turned and left. Then, she would drink a bowl of bitter medicinal soup to refresh herself. After that, she would play chess until noon. In the afternoon, she would cultivate the falling moon immortal technique. At night, she would go pay her respects again. After drinking a bowl of medicinal soup, she would go back with a bitter expression. However, when she went there tonight, it seemed a little different. After entering the hall, a fair hand handed her the medicinal soup. Ning Xuema didn't give herself any time to hesitate and gulped it down. Just as she was about to die from the bitterness, she suddenly felt something warm on her lips. Then, something was stuffed into her mouth. Ning Xuema was furious. She hadn't even finished digesting the medicinal soup, and now there was a new one. This was the rhythm of making her suffer to death. Just as she was about to spit out the thing in her mouth, she suddenly felt a trace of sweetness on the tip of her tongue. It slowly drove away the bitterness. She paused and looked up at Shinjioli. He was looking at her quietly. Chapter 12:30. Seeing that her expression wasn't as sorrowful as before, he looked away and asked lightly, "Is it still bitter?" Ning Xuema shook her head and answered instinctively, "It's not bitter anymore." "Master, is this candy?" It seemed to be fruit-flavored too. Shinjioli nodded and waved his hand, indicating that she could leave. Ning Xuema walked back slowly, feeling the sweetness on the tip of her tongue all the way to the bottom of her heart. She didn't expect that the great god would specially get candy for her. He probably went to the mortal world to buy it, right? And fruit-flavored too. Ning Xuema thought that the aloof and emotionless great god secretly went to the mortal world to buy a bunch of candy back to the Sun-Moon sect. She felt a little amused and touched at the same time. If Yellow Jing and the others knew about this, their eyeballs would probably fall out of their sockets. When she returned to her room, Ning Xuema was stunned when she saw her reflection in the mirror. Who was that girl in the mirror with a love-struck smile on her face? She quickly stopped smiling. Then, she started to smile again unknowingly, like a girl in love for the first time. She was hopeless. Ning Xuema threw herself on the bed and thought in annoyance. After a while, her lips curled into a smile that came from the bottom of her heart. But, her heart was really sweet. Ning Xuema hugged the blanket and rolled around on the bed like a young girl. Then, she got up and continued to cultivate. She had been cultivating the falling moon immortal technique for the past few days. She felt that the negative emotions in her heart had lessened a lot, and her mood had improved a lot. Especially after drinking the medicine that Shinjioli had brewed for her, her emotions had calmed down a lot. She no longer wanted to flip the table in a fit of rage. Ning Xuema enjoyed a rare moment of concentration as she sat on the bed and cultivated wholeheartedly. The moonlight slowly flowed in through the window, coating her with a layer of silver. It reflected the brilliant golden light from cultivating the falling moon immortal technique, making her look exceptionally beautiful. She was dressed in white and sat there quietly. Her body was covered in the splendor of the sun and moon, and there were fragments of golden light constantly flashing. Her long eyelashes were obediently still, like a row of small fans. She was like an elegant fairy, beautiful and tranquil. However, halfway through her cultivation, she suddenly stopped. His heart sank. He hadn't finished reading the rest of the falling moon immortal technique. Now that he had reached that point, forcefully stopping would only result in a backlash. An ominous red light seemed to flash around her body. Ning Xuema only felt that the psychokinesis in her body suddenly shook, and then it started to move around unsteadily. Her tendons and veins were in great pain as if they were about to explode. Her face instantly turned pale as cold sweat dripped down her face, her entire body was trembling, and her body was curled into a ball like a shrimp. Her heart tightened bit by bit, and her breathing became more and more difficult. It was as if someone was strangling her neck and tightening it bit by bit, causing her to lose oxygen bit by bit. She suddenly felt something sweet in her throat, and then she spat out a mouthful of blood. Before she lost consciousness, she fumbled for the snow-white sound transmission talisman in her bosom. Master, at this moment, Shinjuli was writing something in his study room with a pen. His pen was like flowing water, and he wrote domineering and restrained words one by one. As he was writing, his mind suddenly became absent-minded. When he came back to his senses, he was still a little confused. Why did he suddenly become absent-minded? Could it be that he, as her master, also became absent-minded after spending so much time with his erratic disciple? The color of her eyes was pure red, so red that they were like gems. She suddenly giggled. It was a cute child's voice. Great God! Momo misses you so much, Shinjuli's heart sank. Ning Xuema's original body was injured and temporarily fell into a deep sleep because of the qi deviation. Her inner demon naturally replaced her and appeared. There seemed to be a white light flickering in his hand, but he didn't release it. That sweet child's voice sounded again. You have to endure it. If you do, Momo will lose her life. Shinjuli's eyes darkened. The white light suddenly released and enveloped Ning Xuema. She let out a mournful scream, and that child's voice became a little distorted. I knew you were such a heartless person. I knew you would definitely do something to Momo. Shinjuli lightly said, the demon subduing spell is only effective against devils. Chapter 1232. Ning Xuema's expression was a little twisted because of the pain, but she still had a smile on her face. Momo will become a demon sooner or later. Shinjuli's eyes darkened. The white light that shrouded Ning Xuema suddenly intensified. Ning Xuema screamed again. Her red eyes widened and stared at Shinjuli. She screamed, she will become a demon sooner or later. The white light continued to intensify. Ning Xuema finally couldn't stand it anymore. She retreated unwillingly. Ning Xuema also gradually closed her eyes. She fell into a deep sleep again. Shinjuli said lightly, she won't. No one knew who he was talking to. He turned and left. When Ning Xuema woke up the next day, she felt a little weak. She suddenly remembered that she was possessed by a demon last night. Her heart sank. She closed her eyes and operated the psychokinesis in her body. It was still very active and stable. She finally breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she didn't lose all her psychokinesis, some fragmented images suddenly flashed in her mind. They seemed to be her memories, but they also seemed to be not her. In every image, the Almighty seemed to have barged in after she fainted and smoothed out her meridians. Then she held the Almighty's hand tightly and kept acting coquettishly. However, he didn't push her away. Instead, he sat down quietly and accompanied her. After that, what was after that? Ning Xuemo's memory was blank. There was no follow-up. She shook her head. Forget it, she didn't want to think about it. It was getting late. It was time to play chess with the Almighty. When she walked into the main hall, Shinjiuli was standing with his back facing her. The cloud patterns on his loose white robe flowed slowly. There was a faint brilliance around his body. It was the back of a high and mighty god. He seemed to be thinking about something. He didn't notice Ning Xuemo coming in. Ning Xuemo didn't know why, but she felt a little uncomfortable. She felt that the person in front of her seemed to be a little unreachable. However, this feeling only lasted for a moment. Ning Xuemo directly called out to him, "Master." Shinjiuli turned around. His expression was a little cold. "You're awake." Ning Xuemo was a little confused by his cold expression, but she still nodded in response to his nonsense. "Yes, I'm awake." Shinjiuli's fingers moved slightly, and Ning Xuemo felt a strong force pushing her towards Shinjiuli. Then, she stopped when she touched his sleeve. When she looked up, she saw Shinjiuli's godlike face. This distance was too close. Ning Xuemo resisted the desire to retreat. She raised her eyebrows and stood in front of him. "Master." Shinjiuli checked her pulse and finally released it after a while. He looked at her coldly. "Ning Xuemo, you haven't even finished reading the cultivation method and you're already practicing it. How many lives do you have to be so reckless?" Ning Xuemo's lips moved. Finally, she looked down. "Master, you're right." Indeed, she was too reckless. She shouldn't have randomly cultivated. When she looked up again, Shinjiuli was already gone. Ning Xuemo was confused. Where did he go? She stood there in a daze for a long time. Shinjiuli walked out with a book in his hand. When he saw her looking at him in confusion, he threw the book that he had been working on for a few nights to her. "Read it carefully. Memorize it well. 5 Days of Inner Heart Sutra has reached level 3. Ning Xuemo caught it instinctively. When she saw the title, she almost jumped up in shock. Wasn't this the falling moon celestial method that she had accidentally burned? Why was there another one now? Could it be? She flipped to a page and found that the ink was still fresh. Chapter 1233. Did the Almighty write another book overnight? Especially for her, Ning Xuemo suddenly felt a little sour, but also a little sweet. Even if the Almighty lost his memory, he still couldn't help but treat her well, right? He really did love her. Why did he lose his memory? Did he meet with an accident? Looking at Shinjiuli's indifferent face, the question that had been hovering in her heart for a long time finally surfaced. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she still insisted on asking, "Almighty, why did you forget me?" Shinjiuli's eyes moved, quietly looking at her without saying a word. Time passed little by little, as if a century had passed. Just when Ning Xuemo thought she wouldn't get an answer, Shinjiuli's indifferent voice sounded, "This lord sleeps once every 900 years, and after 10 years, I will forget the past." Ning Xuemo's eyes widened in surprise. Damn, what kind of setting is this? The Almighty actually lost his memory frequently. She couldn't help but ask, why? Shinjiuli turned to leave, his voice drifting in the air. This lord also doesn't know why. Although his voice was as indifferent as usual, Ning Xuemo felt a trace of disappointment. Ning Xuemo stood there quietly, not returning to her senses for a long time. Her eyelashes drooped, and her fingers were tightly clenched. Since the Almighty knew about this problem, why didn't he tell her before? Was it because he didn't have time? But she had been with him for so long that he had countless opportunities to tell her about it. She loved him so much, so she definitely wouldn't leave him because of this matter. So what was his concern that he never mentioned it to her, not even half a word? Or, Ning Xuema suddenly didn't dare to think about it anymore. The little loli in her heart suddenly appeared, and said something that she didn't dare to think about. Momo, have you ever thought? Maybe he didn't plan to be with you for a long time, so it doesn't matter if he forgot about you. The little loli sweetly stabbed her in the heart. Ning Xuema's heart trembled. She took a deep breath and said quietly, impossible. The little loli's indifferent voice sounded, all right, Momo, you're always right. You're always deceiving yourself, deceiving your own heart. After throwing down this bomb, the little loli calmed down and no longer spoke. Ning Xuema suddenly felt a little cold. She took a deep breath and tried her best to tell herself not to let her imagination run wild. Perhaps the Almighty had simply forgotten to tell her. She shouldn't recklessly guess the Almighty's original feelings for her. The most important thing in a relationship was trust. She couldn't lose her trust in the Almighty just because of a few words from her inner demons. The Almighty would be disappointed when he returned. A bowl of black medicinal soup suddenly appeared and was stuffed under her nose. Ning Xuema looked up and saw Shinjuli's expressionless face. He said lightly, take the medicine. So he just went to get the medicine for her. He didn't abandon her and leave. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly warmed. She looked at the bowl of medicine in front of her, which she always wanted to find an opportunity to smash in the past. She suddenly found it particularly pleasing to the eye today. She almost happily took the bowl of medicine and drank it in one gulp. Shinjuli, he just went to get the medicine. Why was his disciple acting strangely again? She usually avoided medicine like the plague, so why was she so happy to take it today? Chapter 1234. Could it be that his inner demon had seized the opportunity to possess him again? Shinjuli stuffed a piece of candy into her mouth and checked her pulse. It was quite normal. There wasn't any demonic aura. Ning Xuema could feel the sweetness on the tip of her tongue gradually spreading out as the bitter taste dissipated bit by bit. Just like her mood, it slowly became sunny and bright. Those doubts, fears, and disappointments were like the white snow of spring, gradually dissipating. She looked at Shinjuli with a trace of determination. She couldn't ask him why he hadn't told her before, but she could seize the moment and make him fall in love with her again. 900 years was enough for him to fall in love with her again. Maybe they would even have a baby by then. After 900 years, when he was about to fall asleep, she would stay by his side and make the first person he saw when he woke up. Then, she would tell him the story of what had happened between them. He had walked so close to her this time. Would she be the first person he saw when he woke up? That was most likely the case. When the Almighty woke up, he wouldn't have any memories and would be like a blank piece of paper. Naturally, he would believe whatever Yunshi said. That was strange. Why didn't Yunshi take the opportunity to say that she was the Almighty's wife? Maybe the Almighty would really recognize her. No way. Fortunately, she hadn't said that. It seemed like Yunshi wasn't that thick-skinned. Otherwise, she wouldn't even have a chance now. Therefore, she had to seize the moment. Ning Xuema flashed a bright and beautiful smile. Shinjuli was swayed by her bright and beautiful smile. As he looked at her delicate little face, he suddenly felt nostalgic. How long had it been since he'd seen her smile without any scruples? It had been too long, so long that he had almost forgotten. Previously, when he'd looked at her, he'd felt that something was wrong. At the time, Ning Xuema had been gloomy and silent. she'd always had a gloomy aura around her. Subconsciously, she'd seemed different from the Ning Xuemo he'd subconsciously known. Therefore, he'd been at a loss and had used all sorts of methods to correct her. Now, looking at her smiling brightly in front of him, he finally felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. Ning Xuemo suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but ask, "Master, you said that you sleep for 10 years every time. But why did you only sleep for 8 years this time?" She had already found out that Shinjioli had returned to the Sun-Moon sect 2 years ago. Shinjioli's eyes darkened slightly, and he shook his head. "Master doesn't know." He glanced at her again. "You want Master to wake up after 10 years. Do you think I woke up too early? How could this be?" Ning Xuemo immediately shook her head. "I'm just a little curious." She looked at Shinjioli again. There shouldn't be many people who knew that he slept every 900 years, right? The Almighty had been so nice to her and they were so close, but he had never revealed this secret to her. Now, he had told her so easily, subconsciously, he still trusted her, right? From the looks of it, it shouldn't be too difficult to get him back. It was as if Ning Xuemo saw a beautiful future waiting for her. Her eyebrows and eyes were filled with unconcealable happiness. Shinjioli patted her head. "Go, cultivate the falling moon immortal technique well. Don't disappoint Master's expectations of you." Ning Xuemo took the thick and heavy book and solemnly nodded her head. "All right, Master." She turned around and walked out. Suddenly, she turned around and stood with her back to the light. She sent a flying kiss to the Almighty. "Moi, Almighty." Chapter 12:35. Damn it, she really wanted to fly into his arms and give him a loud kiss on the cheek. But she was also afraid that he would give her a scare and send her flying. That wouldn't be worth it. So she had to take it slow, take it slow. Anyway, she was already at Earth stage level 8 and had a lifespan of 1,000 years. She had plenty of time to waste with him. She, Ning Xuemo, could get whatever she wanted. So what if the Almighty lost his memory once? She would still get him back. The next time he fainted, she would stay by his side. If they had a child, she would let the child stay by his side. He would try to forget about her again. That's right. After they reconciled, she would force him to write a diary about everything that happened between them. When he woke up, she would throw the diary he had written at him and make him read it himself. That would be the living proof. He had to admit it even if he didn't want to. At most, she would fall in love with the Almighty again every 900 years. He would be so cute and gullible when he woke up, she wondered if he would be shocked if she mischievously said that she was his mother. Shinjioli looked at the person in front of him who was covered in a layer of golden light. A strong sense of familiarity rose in his heart. It was as if this scene had happened not long ago. However, he couldn't find it even after searching his memory. Strangely, he understood the meaning of this sentence. He smiled faintly. His thin lips parted slightly as he spat out, "Moi." Ning Xuemo felt that she had floated back to her room. Her soul hadn't returned yet. She spun around a few times on the spot before she calmed down. It was as if she was talking about her first love with the Almighty again. She loved the Almighty, and the Almighty had a good impression of her now. She flipped open the big book and looked at the familiar handwriting. Her heart felt warm as if it was stuffed with a small stove. Determination flashed across her eyes. She had to cultivate the falling moon immortal technique as fast as possible. 4 days, no, 3 days. Cultivate to level 3 and then give the Almighty a surprise. For a genius like her, cultivating a mental cultivation method would definitely be a piece of cake. Ning Xuemo began to practice her mental cultivation method day and night. Her morning and evening greetings were also waved by the Almighty. With her optimistic state of mind and her hard work in cultivation, her psychokinesis increased like a sesame seed blossoming. There was a new change every day. On the afternoon of the third day, Ning Xuema's body suddenly burst into a circle of brilliant colorful light. It was as if she was bathing in the multicolored light, making her even more dazzling. When the colorful light dissipated, she sensed her body on the bed and then jumped up. Success! He had cultivated the falling moon immortal technique to the 3rd level. Ha ha ha, I am indeed a rare genius. Leveling up 1 level a day was like child's play. The great god's requirements were already strict enough. He didn't expect that he would be able to complete the task so early. The great god must be surprised, right? He would definitely think that he had picked up a treasure by taking her in as his disciple. She opened the door and rushed out like a tornado. The joy in her heart overflowed, and she didn't want to hide it anymore. She hadn't seen him for 3 days. To be honest, she really missed him. Now that she had successfully cultivated and was going to see him, she wondered what his expression would be when he saw her. Gratified? Happy? Excited? Maybe he would be so happy that his memory would come back. Cough, cough, she was thinking too much. Ning Xuema's heart thumped wildly. Chapter 1236. She was so excited that her heart almost jumped out of her chest at the thought of being able to see the Almighty's surprised expression. She thought that the great deity would definitely be unable to restrain himself from patting her head and faintly smiling. Not bad, Xuema deserves to be called a little genius. Just like the day when she first learned how to fly on a sword, he suddenly stood on her sword and gently wrapped his arms around her waist. He smiled lightly beside her ear and said, "Little genius, take this lord for a spin." His breath was right beside her ear, causing her earlobe to unconsciously turn red, and her heart to slightly ripple. Ning Xuema felt a strong sense of happiness when she thought of that scene. There were specks of light in her eyes, as bright as the stars. Her petal-like lips faintly curled into a smile, bright and confident. Almighty, no matter how many times you forget, I, Ning Xuema, will accompany you to the end and pester you for life. Ning Xuema rushed into the main hall like a whirlwind. Shinjiuli was not inside. Could he be in the study room? She went to the study room again. There was no one in the study room. Ning Xuema searched all the rooms but could not find Shinjiuli. She saw a bowl of soup in the pharmacy. It was black and steaming. It looked like it had just been decocted. Where was he? Ning Xuema walked closer and found a note under the bowl. There were a few words written on the note: "Drink the medicine while it's hot." The note was written in a simple and concise style. It was obvious that it was written by Shinjiuli. He left a note for her to drink the medicine instead of personally urging her to drink it. Did he go out for something? What did he do? How long would he be back? Was it dangerous? Would it be like the last time and not come back for a long time? Ning Xuema looked at the note quietly as if she could see a flower in it. She felt a little disappointed. She was like a child who got full marks in an exam and wanted to share her happiness with her parents, only to find out that her parents had gone overseas for a vacation. She sighed and looked at the note again. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she carefully folded the note and put it in her arms. This could be considered the Almighty's first letter to her. Although it was just a short sentence. Ning Xuema had a headache as she looked at the medicinal soup that she had neglected for a long time. The light in his eyes flickered as he picked it up and brought it to his nose. The bitter smell was so strong that it hurt his brain. Every time she drank this medicine, she had the urge to smash it. She had never thought that she would be traumatized from drinking medicine. She was a doctor herself, but she couldn't figure out the composition of the dregs after studying them for a long time. If she didn't know that the Almighty wouldn't harm her, she would have thought that the medicine was made to punish her. She silently held the bowl of medicine and walked to a bonsai. Just as she was about to use the medicine to nourish the flowers and plants, her sharp eyes suddenly noticed that there seemed to be a note in the bonsai. It said, "Don't throw it away. Ning Shuama. Guru, you're really good at predicting things." In the end, she tilted her head back and gulped down the medicine. She subconsciously waited for the candy, but suddenly realized that the Almighty had already left. Ning Shuama finally walked out of the hall slowly. She wandered around aimlessly. Her eyes couldn't help but wander around. Did the Almighty leave a note somewhere else for her to find? She felt as if she was looking for treasure. Ning Shuama looked up unintentionally and seemed to have noticed something. She stopped in her tracks, her body stiffened and her gaze focused. Chapter 1237. Not far away, two figures could be seen riding the wind. One of them was dressed in a white robe that fluttered like an immortal, while the other was dressed in a light yellow robe that fluttered in the wind. The two of them were very close to each other. Their figures were like an immortal couple, so beautiful that it was like a dream. It was the Almighty and Yunshi. She felt as if her head had been hit by a stick. Her heart seemed to have stopped for a few seconds. Ning Shuama froze on the spot, feeling her fingertips turn cold. Why were they together? Where were they going? Why hadn't he told her anything before? She stood in place for about half a minute. Her originally happy mood had completely flown away. Her heart felt extremely heavy, as if a lead ball had been dropped on it. She thought for a moment and finally took out a voice transmission talisman. When she saw the color of the talisman, she couldn't help but laugh bitterly. When she had been imprisoned by Shui Lan, most of Ning Shuama's treasures had been kept by him. Every time Shui Lan brought her out of the barrier, he would take away her treasures and return them to her when they returned to the barrier. This included the voice transmission talisman that the Almighty had given her and the moonlight sword that had almost stabbed her to death. After she had been rescued by the Almighty, he hadn't given her anything new. This meant that she didn't have any tools to contact the Almighty now. The voice transmission talisman in her hand was just an ordinary one from the Sun-Moon sect. She could use it to contact Yilu Jing and the other senior brothers, but she couldn't contact the Almighty directly. Forget it. Perhaps the Almighty really had something to do and had gone out. Since he hadn't told her his whereabouts, perhaps he would be back soon. She couldn't always compare him to before he had lost his memory. Now, he only treated her as his disciple. She didn't need to worry too much about it. She didn't want to make things difficult for herself. Momo, poor Momo. You've been abandoned again. The little Loli's voice in her head was filled with schadenfreude. Ning Shuama finally came back to her senses. She took a deep breath, looked into the distance one last time, and turned to leave. He ran away with Yunshi. He doesn't want you anymore. Momo, aren't you sad that they let you down? Aren't you sad? I can hear your heart crying again. It says it's too tired, it says it doesn't want to be sad anymore. Momo, can you hear that? Little Loli's sweet voice was filled with malice. Ning Shuama pursed her lips and didn't say anything, but her tightly clenched fingers betrayed her emotions. Momo, you won't be sad if you become a demon. Once you become a demon, you'll have powerful abilities that will be enough to kill Yunshi 100 times. The little Loli's persuasive voice echoed in her mind over and over again. Ning Shuama pushed open the door of her room and sat quietly at the desk. Momo, why are you so against becoming a devil? You must know that you're a demon, human emotions are just a burden to you. The little Loli's voice was ethereal, with a hint of enchantment. If one's mind was not firm enough, it would be easy to fall into her voice. Ning Shuama raised her eyes and looked at the lush trees outside the window. She listened to the melodious chirping of the birds outside the window and said indifferently, "I'm indeed very sad and very upset. I also really want to drag Yunshi over and beat her up. There's a way." The little loli was overjoyed. Her voice was even more ethereal and dreamy. It was so melodious that it seemed to float from the horizon with a faint echo. Then become a demon. Momo, once you become a demon, you'll be emotionless and loveless. No one will be able to hurt you then. Ning Shuima's voice was as clear as water as it flowed into her ears. However, if I become a demon and a heartless and loveless monster, will I still be me? What's the difference between me and a machine? Chapter 1238. Plus, the first thing I'll do after becoming a demon is to drag you out and beat you up. She paused and her tone turned cold with a hint of mockery. So shut up. You're just a little kid, yet you want to get involved in adult matters. Little Lolita was speechless. Little Lolita imitated Ning Shuima's cold and mocking tone. You'll regret it. You'll definitely regret it. I'll wait for Shinjioli to hurt you until you're covered in cuts and bruises. I'll wait for you to come begging me. The corners of Ning Shuima's lips curled up slightly as she replied nonchalantly, "Okay. Then you'll have to wait." Little Lolita was speechless. Through the constant struggle with her heart's devil, Ning Shuima felt that her sadness had lessened quite a bit, especially when her heart's devil was choked to the point that it couldn't speak. She even smiled. Suddenly, she thought of something. The Almighty also needed friends. No matter how much she loved him, she couldn't restrict him from making friends. The Almighty only treated Yunshi as a friend. Although Yunshi was interested in the Almighty, she hadn't succeeded in so many years. How could she suddenly succeed now? Perhaps the Almighty had something important to do with Yunshi and had left in a hurry, forgetting to tell her. Besides, hadn't he already brewed her medicine and written her a note? Ning Shuima was a free and easy person. She couldn't always be so calculative, that wouldn't be like her. Ning Shuima felt that ever since she started practicing the falling moon immortal technique and drank medicine every day, she had become more resistant to the verbal attacks of her inner demon. She seemed to have become more rational. Although the medicine was bitter, it was good medicine if it could cure illnesses. Perhaps this was why she still drank medicine every day even though she didn't have a cold anymore. Ning Shuima sat cross-legged and continued practicing the falling moon immortal technique. A day passed just like that. Shinjioli still hadn't returned even when the sky was completely dark. Ning Shuima went to bed early to avoid letting her imagination run wild again. She didn't have any dreams that night. The next day, Shinjioli still hadn't returned. Of course, no one would force her to drink that bitter medicine anymore. This was her only small benefit after he left. Ning Shuima meditated for an entire day because she found that it was easier to pass the time by meditating. She didn't feel that time was too hard to bear. On the morning of the third day, when she once again walked around the heavenly sound peak, she finally took out the sound-transmitting talisman and contacted Yellow Jing. She immediately asked him if he knew where her master was. Yellow Jing seemed surprised. Didn't master go to 5 Sound Island with someone? What? He didn't tell you. Ning Shuima smiled. It's good that he told you. She chatted with Yellow Jing for a while before ending the communication with Yellow Jing. She sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and was lost in thought for a moment. She knew about the 5 Sound Island. It was the legendary island of lovers. It was said that all the creatures on the island were in pairs. There were pairs of mandarin ducks, pairs of elk, and even the trees on the island grew in pairs and intertwined together like lovers. Many eligible couples on the Tianxi continent liked to go to the island to pledge their lives. Legend had it that after pledging their lives there, they would receive the blessings of the island god and could grow old together. There were even some who went there to pledge their lives, now that Shinjioli and Yunshi had gone there, what would they do? Ning Xuema seemed to recall the scenes of her reunion with the Almighty in the past 6 months. The Almighty and Yunshi drank tea together, the Almighty and Yunshi traveled together in the car, the Almighty painted for Yunshi. Chapter 1239. In just half a year, she'd seen the great god and Yunshi together 6 times, and she'd even seen them by accident. What about those she hadn't seen? How many times? In this half a year, the great god and Yunshi had met more frequently than usual. It was almost comparable to a date between a man and a woman. And this time, he'd gone to Lover's Island for 3 days. He wouldn't come back after his honeymoon, right? Ning Xuema's heart felt like it was suffocating a knot, and it was uncomfortable. She didn't want to let her imagination run wild like a resentful woman, but she couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. The sun gradually rose from the horizon. The sunlight was very warm on her body, but she felt a little cold. Unconsciously, she recalled the scenes of Shui Emo and Shinjioli in her previous life. She recalled that at the very end, Shinjioli had come together with Shui Emo. Not only had he sealed Shui Lan in the crystal coffin, but he'd also pushed Shui Emo to the position of the devil ancestor. In the end, he'd helped Shui Emo fight Shui Emo and coldly watched as Shui Emo's heart was pierced by Shui Emo's sword. Her memories of Shui Emo ended when Shinjioli looked down at her and said, "Shui Emo, this is retribution for betraying this lord." This sentence was like a heavy hammer striking a bloody stroke at the end of Shui Emo's story. When Ning Xuema occasionally thought of it, her heart would tighten. Her whole body would turn cold. Ning Xuema didn't want to care about who was right and who was wrong in her previous life. She only wanted to grasp this life. So when this memory occasionally popped up in her mind, she would fiercely slap it back down. So that it wouldn't affect her judgment of love in this life, this time was the same. As soon as this memory popped up, she slapped it back down into the depths of her mind. She closed her eyes and meditated again. But after a while, she opened her eyes again. She couldn't calm her heart. She simply couldn't calm her heart now. It was like a tide had risen in her chest, and waves of negative emotions were surging up. Cultivating in this state of mind obviously wasn't good. Not only wouldn't it be effective, it might even cause chi deviation. She simply jumped off the bed, her gaze inadvertently sweeping over the fresh fruits on the table. Her gaze suddenly froze. Little Apple. Little Apple wasn't back yet. She had been so busy these past few days that she had forgotten about Little Apple. No, she had to find it. She opened the door and rushed out. However, after taking 2 steps, she suddenly stopped. Shui Lan must be out there looking for her. If he went out like this, he might fall into his demonic claws. She stood in place for a moment and suddenly couldn't help but laugh. What's wrong with me? So worried about personal gains and losses. She had always done things in a straightforward manner. When did she become so wishy-washy? When she was in her own era, she traveled the world alone and completed several seemingly impossible and dangerous missions on her own. She had never been so timid. The continent was so big, how could it be so easy to bump into Shui Lan? Moreover, she had the art of disguise. As long as he hid his aura and was careful, he would be fine. She couldn't possibly not eat because she was afraid of choking to death, right? She walked to the front of the dressing table and looked at the elegant face inside. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, a thin and small middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance appeared in the mirror. That man's face was extremely ordinary. He was the type that couldn't be recognized if he was thrown into a crowd. Of course, if one looked closely, they would find that this man's eyes were extremely bright, like a black pearl in a still pool of water. Chapter 1241. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Shijue ran away from home to look for her. Why don't you return to the Bright King residence? It's much better to use the Bright King residence's power to search for someone than to search alone. The news of her death had spread all over the world, but Shijue did not give up. She felt a warm feeling in her heart, and a stream of heat flowed from her chest. She simply leaned against a large rock and watched from where she was. Shijue heard Guardian Xiao's words and smirked. The Bright King residence's power. Do you think I can afford to order them around? My sister didn't even put in the effort to search for her. She was just dealing with me back then. Guardian Xiao was speechless. He sighed. You've misunderstood the princess. The princess has sent out countless people to search for her these few years, but you don't know about it. Shijue sneered. Since the Bright King residence's power has already searched for her, then there's no need for me to go back and arrange for more people. You guys search for your own people, and I'll search for mine. Guardian Xiao was speechless. Prince, the princess is very worried about you. Why don't you come back with us and meet the princess first? You can come out again in the future. There's no need to persuade me anymore. I won't return to the Bright King residence until I find her. Shijue was very determined. The 4 Bright King residence's guardians tried to persuade him again, but Shijue's attitude was unusually firm. In the end, both sides broke down and the 4 Bright King residence's guardians could only force it, and the 5 of them started fighting. Ning Xuema originally wanted to go out and meet Shijue to prove that she was still alive so that he could rest assured. However, when she saw them fighting, she decided to hide herself and watch from afar. The 5 of them were all experts. Once they started fighting, it was naturally exciting and full of big moves. Ning Xuema was pleased to find that Shijue's martial arts had more than doubled in the past 10 years. Whether it was his psychokinesis or his ability to adapt, they were all greatly improved and could not be compared to the past. More importantly, when he was fighting back then, he pursued perfection in his movements, but in reality, they were useless. Now, his moves were clean and efficient. Every move was focused on its function and effectiveness, attacking the enemy's vital points without any hesitation. His telekinesis was now about Earth Stage Level 4, but he could unleash the power of Earth Stage Level 6. As for the 4 Wise King's Mansion Guardians, their martial arts were obviously not as good as his. Furthermore, they did not dare to really hurt Shiju. Hence, when they made their moves, they could not help but be cautious. After half an hour, the 4 Wise King's Mansion Guardians were immobilized by Shiju and could no longer move. Ning Xuema cheered for Shiju in her heart. 10 years ago, any one of these 4 protectors could easily defeat Shiju. Now, the 4 protectors were still not Shiju's match even if they joined forces. 10 years of time had turned the young and inexperienced Shiju into a peerless sharp blade. It would not be easy to injure him. The 4 protectors obviously didn't expect Shiju's martial arts to be so high. After Shiju stopped them, he left a sentence and walked away coolly. Go back and tell the princess that she doesn't need to care about me. The 4 protectors could still move above their heads. They looked at each other in dismay. Although they were in a somewhat awkward position, their eyes were still filled with relief. Their little heir had really grown up. With his current martial arts, he would not easily be at a disadvantage in the martial arts world. Indeed, suffering was the best way to train a person. After about a quarter of an hour, a gust of wind came from nowhere. The 4 protectors all felt their corresponding acupuncture points heat up. The acupuncture points that were sealed were actually unsealed in an instant. Chapter 1242. They were startled. They were all martial arts experts. Based on the strength they felt when they were hit, they should have been immobilized here for more than 6 hours. Now, they were undone in less than a quarter of an hour. It was as if there was a peerless expert secretly helping them. Who's helping us? Please show yourself. Protector Xia said loudly. But the only reply he got was the slight breeze from the mountain. The 4 protectors discussed for a while and decided not to chase after their young master anymore. The 4 of them split into 2 groups. One group would return to the Bright King Manor to report to the princess, while the other group would chase after their young master. Of course, this time they would only protect him secretly and would not force him to return to the Bright King Manor. Ning Xuemo was hiding in the dark. When she heard their discussion, she smiled secretly and turned to leave. Although Shi Ju had matured a lot, there were still some loopholes. He immobilized the 4 protectors here and ran away by himself. It would be better if no enemies of the Bright King Manor saw him, but if he happened to meet an enemy, the 4 protectors would be confused, so she secretly saved the 4 of them. Of course, she was not prepared to meet them to avoid trouble. In a tea stall, Shi Ju sat in front of a table with a pot of tea in front of him. He did not touch it for a long time and seemed to be in a daze. When Ning Xuemo unintentionally walked to this place, she saw this scene. Her footsteps paused for a moment before she entered the tea shed and sat down in front of a table. Shi Ju's eyes lit up when he saw her. He walked to her table and asked, "Brother, can I share a table with you?" Ning Xuemo gestured for him to sit down and Shi Ju sat down opposite her. "Brother, are you a disciple of the Sun Moon sect?" Shi Ju's gaze swept over Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo was wearing the clothes of a normal disciple of the Sun Moon sect. Ning Xuemo laughed and said, "I guess so. What's the matter?" Shi Ju did not stand on ceremony and went straight to the point. "I heard that your sect's Dizun's youngest disciple, Lady Ning, has returned to the mountain. Is that true?" The reason why Ning Xuemo sat down here was to wait for him to ask this question, so that it would be convenient for her to tell him the news and reassure him. Thus, she smiled and said straightforwardly, "That's right. Lady Ning came back a few days ago. The entire Sun Moon sect even specially celebrated for her." "Then, is she okay?" Shi Ju's eyes lit up again, and his fingers suddenly clenched tightly. All these years, he had been looking for her like crazy. He had traveled all over the world, but he still couldn't find any news about her. There were rumors in the pugilistic world that she was dead, but he refused to believe them. If she was alive, he wanted to see her. If she was dead, he wanted to see her corpse. This was his only thought. However, he had been on the verge of despair these past few years. Unexpectedly, a few days ago, he had inadvertently heard someone say that Ning Xuemo had been found by the ancestor and was now on the Sun Moon sect's Buddha Lotus Mountain. When he got the news, he rushed over without rest for a few days. He wanted to find out the exact information. Unfortunately, the Buddha Lotus Mountain was not a place that ordinary people could enter. Only those who had received an invitation from the Sun Moon sect could enter with their invitation cards. It was harder than ascending to the heavens for others to enter. Even if Shi Ju was the wise king's heir, he couldn't enter at all. He had arrived in the vicinity yesterday afternoon. During this day, he had thought of all sorts of ideas and used countless methods, but it was all in vain. He couldn't even get close to the barrier of the Buddha Lotus Mountain. During this day, he had naturally interacted with a few of the Sun Moon sect's gatekeepers several times. Chapter 1243. However, these disciples were probably too low-level and they were tight-lipped, so it was impossible for Shi Ju to get in. Even if he wanted to ask about Ning Xuemo, he couldn't get any information. He was more resilient and was unwilling to give up just like that. When he was at his wit's end, he coincidentally met Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo's disguise was exquisite and he didn't recognize her at all. However, he was overjoyed to hear about Ning Xuemo from her. He stared at Ning Xuemo with a pair of cold eyes and wanted to dig out more information. How is she now? Did he get hurt or something? Where has she been all these years? Did she suffer a lot? A series of questions were thrown at her and Ning Xuemo felt a little warm in her heart. She is very good now and her martial arts have improved a lot. You don't have to worry about her anymore. Shiju sighed in relief but suddenly thought of something and looked at Ning Xuemo suspiciously. How did you know that I am the wise king's heir? Oh no, I was happy to see an old friend and let it slip. Ning Xuemo faintly smiled and casually lied. A few years ago, I met His Highness, but His Highness didn't pay attention to me. Shiju didn't let her go. A few years ago. Where? Ning Xuemo was slightly stunned. She didn't expect him to have the spirit to get to the bottom of things. She felt a headache coming on. About 10 years ago, I also attended the state banquet in Chongkong country. There were many people that day and although you didn't notice me, I still noticed you. Her words were 80% true and 20% false. Shiju seemed to believe her and nodded. I see. Thank you, brother. Ning Xuemo said, You're welcome. She tried to hold it in but couldn't and added, Now that Miss Ning has returned to the Sun Moon sect, she is safe. You can go back to the wise king's mansion without worry. She didn't want to see anything happen to Shijue again. To him, the bright king residence was the safest place. The corner of Shiju's lips curled up slightly. He didn't say anything and just took a sip of tea. Ning Xuemo didn't want to chat with him any longer, so she put down an ingot of silver on the table and paid for Shiju's bill. Then, she turned around and left. She had just taken a few steps when Shiju, who was behind her, suddenly spoke up, Are you also from the Bright King Manor? What? Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows and looked at him. Shiju's eyes were as sharp as swords. Or perhaps you've received some benefits from the Bright King's residence to coax me back. Did my elder sister hire you? Is this her new trick? Ning Xuemo, after not seeing him for a few years, this kid's paranoia had gotten worse. However, she did seem to be a little too enthusiastic this time. Once he asked, she told him everything. This made him suspicious. He thought that she was sent by Princess Mingwan to trick him so that he could return home. It seemed that if she didn't let him see Ning Xuemo in person this time, he probably wouldn't give up. Ning Xuemo sized him up a few more times before she suddenly had a mischievous thought. She curled her lips into a smile. This isn't a good place to talk. How about we find another place to talk? Shiju looked at her suspiciously. What new trick are you up to now? Ning Xuemo beckoned him with her finger before flying away. Before she left behind a sentence, You don't have to follow me, but if you do, you will never get the answer you want. Chapter 1244. She purposely displayed the Sun Moon sex movement technique in front of Shiju and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Shiju's heart skipped a beat. This person was indeed a disciple of the Sun Moon sect, and his martial arts weren't low. Could it be that what he said was true? Shiju's heart itched from Ning Xuemo's last sentence. He steeled his heart and chased after her. Ning Xuemo wanted to test Shiju's martial arts, so she purposely kept a distance from him. Every time he was about to catch up, she would instantly speed up and widen the distance between them. This happened a few times in a row, and Shiju's competitive spirit was also aroused. He simply used all his martial arts to chase after her. The two of them were as fast as lightning, and in the blink of an eye, they had already run dozens of miles. It was a winding path with overgrown weeds on both sides. It couldn't be more remote, and there wasn't a single human hair in sight. Where are you bringing me? This place is very remote and is a good place to talk. Can you stop and talk to me? Shiju couldn't help but call out from behind. Ning Xuema finally stopped in front. She slowly turned around and looked at Shiju from head to toe. She smiled and asked, "Talk about what?" Shiju wanted to clench his teeth and hold back his anger. Naturally, it's about Miss Ning. Did you really see her? Through this run, he had already seen that the person in front of him had unfathomable martial arts. Her position in the Sun-Moon sect shouldn't be low, so he still believed some of her words. Ning Xuema chuckled. Of course, I see her every day. Shiju didn't believe her again. You're lying. I heard that as the ancestor's disciple, she lives on the heavenly Sound Peak. Without the ancestor's permission, no one is allowed to go near that place. How can you see Miss Ning every day? He had heard quite a lot of things. Shiju felt that she wasn't just an ordinary person. Ning Xuema didn't say anything, but her eyes kept on looking at Shiju. Shiju was a little scared by her stare. He frowned and asked coldly, "Why are you sizing me up instead of answering my question?" He had always had the temper of a young master, and if it weren't for the fact that Ning Xuema was a disciple of the Sun-Moon sect, he would have long since flown into a rage based on the fact that Ning Xuema was sizing him up so rudely. His expression became stern, and his entire aura became much colder. The once small ice cube had grown into a huge iceberg. Ning Xuema's mischievous mood became even stronger. She curled her lips into a smile and looked at Shiju, casually saying, "What a pretty boy. Why don't you come back with me and be my wife?" Shiju. His expression changed on the spot. He clenched his fist and said coldly, "What did you say?" He hated it the most when people called him beautiful. The person in front of him not only violated his taboo, but also dared to flirt with him. Ning Xuema was the type of person who would act like whatever she wanted to act. At this moment, she was acting like a lecher. Therefore, she once again revealed a lecherous smile. "Little brother, you're really too beautiful. It's a waste for such a beauty to not get married. Why don't you come with me? I'll guarantee that you'll live a good life." Her words were simply copied from the lines that young thugs used to flirt with good girls. How could Shiju stand this? He immediately changed his expression. "You're courting death." A black long sword appeared in his hand out of thin air. Carrying the force of a thunderbolt, he stabbed towards Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema fought with him. Chapter 1245. Shiju's skills had improved a lot in the past few years. His strength had already reached Earth rank level 4.5. He was also a genius to improve so quickly. Shiju felt that the person in front of him had unfathomable skills. She did not use her full strength when fighting with him. Instead, she was playing with him like a cat playing with a mouse. She would always take the time to pat his shoulder and touch his face. The murderous intent in Shiju's eyes could freeze people to death. He simply used all kinds of strange moves. When he fought with the four guardians, he still held back a little so as not to really hurt them. But now, he was using all of his power, displaying everything that he had learned in his life to the fullest. All kinds of killer moves greeted Ning Xuema. He could not wait to cut this brat who dared to tease him in half. When the opponent's skills are far beyond your own and your goal is unclear, it is unwise to be provoked by the opponent and desperately chase after the opponent. Ning Xuema said in the middle of the fight. Shiju ignored her and continued to attack like a storm. After a while. "Brat, your skills are far inferior to mine. Instead of looking for a chance to escape, you really want to fight with your life on the line. Stupid." Ning Xuema secretly held back 2 or 3 times during the fight. If Shi Ju took this opportunity, he could turn around and escape, but he gave up on this opportunity. When did this brat become so stubborn? Ning Xuema could not help but teach him a lesson. Shi Ju's posture was as if he was going to fight with his life on the line. He turned a deaf ear to her words. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed slightly. She decided to give him a more profound lesson. Suddenly, she changed her fighting style. At the place where she poured her psychokinesis, the sword tip trembled and a string of light flashed across Shi Ju's body. Shi Ju could not move. Ning Xuema circled around him until she was facing him. She lifted his chin with her finger. This time, she was standing on top of a mountain rock. She was taller than Shi Ju by quite a bit. She did this pose very well. Beauty, your temper isn't small. Let brother teach you a lesson and let you know when to advance and when to retreat. Shi Ju pursed his lips and did not answer. Ning Xuema did not seal his mute acupoint. She thought that her few words of teasing would cause him to be angry, but she did not expect him to choose to be mute. Speak. Come, as long as you call me good brother a few times, maybe I'll let you go. Ning Xuema put her hand on his shoulder. Shi Ju still didn't answer. He didn't have any intention of giving in. This brat was really stubborn. With his temperament, would he really not suffer great losses in the Jianghu? Ning Xuema began to seriously doubt this possibility. She wanted to test where his bottom line was, so she raised her hand and pinched his cheeks again. She smiled carelessly and said, "TSK, this little face is as soft as tofu. Why don't you come home with me and be my wife?" Shi Ju slowly raised his head and finally opened his mouth. "You're already married. Do you really want me to be your husband, person?" This line doesn't seem quite right. Ning Xuema said casually, "Don't you know that a man can have 3 wives and 4 concubines? Even if I marry someone else, it won't delay marrying you." No, how did this brat know that she was married? She was still single, okay. Could it be that the man she put on had a face that was hollowed out by wine and women? Ning Xuema almost wanted to touch Shi Jue's face again, but she chose to touch Shi Jue's face instead. She giggled and said, "Besides, this young master is still unmarried. Once you marry into my family, you can be my wife." Chapter 1246. Shi Jue stared at her. Really? Could it be that this brat was truly moved? Could it be that she had misjudged him in the past? Was he actually a lustful wolf? Was he already a submissive? Ning Xuema was a little shocked. Of course. However, if you follow me, you have to be wholehearted and not have any other thoughts. Ning Xuema tested his bottom line again. All right. I promise. Shi Jue's words were loud and clear. Ning Xuema was speechless. Could it be that this brat was a masochist? He would instantly fall in love with anyone who could defeat him. Ning Xuema and Shi Jue actually didn't have many opportunities to interact with each other back then. When Shi Jue was her secret guard, he was like a taciturn gourd and didn't talk much. Ning Xuema wasn't very clear about his personality. Furthermore, if a person's sexual orientation was abnormal, it couldn't be seen on the surface. It was really like knowing a person for a long time without understanding his true nature. Ning Xuema secretly wrung her hands. However, she was more receptive to new things and didn't reject or look down on lustful men. However, she was a little dissatisfied that Shi Jue had so easily promised his life to her. Wasn't this brat afraid that she was really a scum? She snorted and glanced at him. "Little heir, I didn't expect you to have such a hobby. This hobby is actually nothing much and is understandable. However, there's a problem with your method of finding a good partner. How much do you know about me by promising your life to me so easily? Aren't you afraid that I'm a rapist? I'm not afraid. Shijue stared at her. I'm willing to be raped by you. Ning Xuema was speechless. Could he let her tease him properly? When a rapist was flirted with, how would a real rapist react? Ning Xuema began to seriously consider this. This kind of teasing didn't give her any sense of accomplishment at all. Ning Xuema took a few steps back. Shijue looked at her. I've been looking for you for 10 years and you want to leave just like that. Ning Xuema suddenly looked up. You. This guy actually recognized her. Xuema, I haven't seen you in 10 years. How have you been? Shiju finally asked the most important question. Ning Xuema raised her hand and touched her nose. With a wave of her hand, she unsealed his acupoints and said, Shijue, how did you recognize me? She thought that she did not reveal many flaws. When she was with Shijue back then, she was still a 13-year-old lowly. Now that she was in her 20s, her figure and voice had changed a lot. She didn't expect him to still recognize her. When you were fighting just now, you used the 3 steps movement technique. That's one of the reasons. Shijue moved his arms and legs and began to dispel her doubts. This brat is quite shrewd. Even he had noticed such a small flaw. She raised her eyebrows. One of them. There are still 2 and 3. Your kung fu is obviously much higher than mine, but you didn't kill me. You were very merciful to me. This is the second reason. Ning Xuema simply hugged her arms and listened to him. Although your teasing is very much like a lecher, your actions are not the actions of a real rapist. This is the third reason. Have you seen a real rapist? Ning Xuema was curious. Shijue pursed his lips. He had indeed seen a real rapist. Those people's actions were extremely wretched. When they teased someone, they would definitely not just touch the person's shoulders and face. They would also touch those untouchable parts. When Ning Xuema teased him just now, she didn't touch his other parts at all. This didn't make sense. Ning Xuema. Why did she feel that this sentence was a little ambiguous? Xuema, is what you said just now true? Shiju took a step forward and there was a faint masculine strength in his body. What are you referring to? Ning Xuema said a lot just now and she couldn't figure out which sentence Shiju was referring to. You're not married yet. I can be your wife. Shiju said word by word. He seemed to be serious and joking at the same time. Ning Xuema. She was just joking with him, okay? She laughed. Shiju, you're a man. The title of wife doesn't suit you. Chapter 1248. Alright, I won't joke with you anymore. Let's find a place to talk. Shiju's eyes flashed. Xuema, I don't think it was a joke just now. Ning Xuema, why did she run over to tease him just now? Now, retribution has come. She shot herself in the foot, didn't she? She didn't know how to clean up the mess now, did she? Ning Xuema sighed and admitted her mistake. I was wrong. I shouldn't have teased you. Suddenly, a child's voice asked curiously, Momo, aren't you very sad? Why do you still have time to tease others? Aren't you afraid of bringing bad luck to him? Ning Xuema replied indifferently in her heart, should I write all my emotions on my face and then face my friends with a sad face? Do you want them to frown like you? That's what children do. Learn from them, little brat. Little lowly. Why did Ning Xuema always make her so angry recently? What was wrong? Why did this girl suddenly become so rational? When she was in the demon palace, she could not calm down after being teased lightly. Shiju's eyes flashed with a smile. I'm happy to be teased by you. He raised his arm and held her hand. Shuemo. Do you know how hard I've been looking for you all these years? How much do I regret? Regret? Regret knowing her. Or regret being her secret guard? Ning Shuemo originally wanted to pull her hand away, but when she heard his words, she asked curiously, what do you regret? I regret not being by your side at that time. He regretted not confessing to her in time, which led to someone else taking the initiative, Ning Shuemo. She coughed, I don't blame you. You didn't have a choice when you returned to the Bright King's residence. So at that time, I swore that I would practice martial arts well and become independent as soon as possible. I won't let them force me to do anything, and I won't be helpless when the person I love is hurt. Shiju looked at her with a determined gaze. After 10 years of reunion, Shiju had matured a lot and became much stronger. He was also much more manly and was no longer that young boy. Ning Shuemo felt gratified and a headache. She patted his shoulder. Shiju, you've really grown up. She wanted to take her other hand. Shiju held her hand tightly as if he would never let go. Unless Ning Shuemo used her real martial arts to shake his hand, she would not be able to get rid of him. Shiju suddenly pulled her. Ning Shuemo was caught off guard and stumbled into his embrace. Shuemo. This brat was really bold. Ning Shuemo was speechless. She raised her hand and was about to shake him off when she suddenly sensed something. She looked up at the sky not far away and froze. Not far away in the sky, there were two people floating there. One of them was dressed in snow-white robes and wore a white jade mask on his face, revealing only a pair of extremely black eyes. The cold aura around him was enough to make everyone retreat. It was Dizun, Shinjoli. Beside him was a woman in a light yellow dress. Her appearance was elegant and refined, and her eyes seemed to be able to speak. She was beautiful beyond compare. It was Yunqi. Yunqi's arm was wrapped around Shinjoli's as she leaned her head against him. The two of them stood there side by side like a pair of jade. Chapter 1249. The two of them had gone out together for 3 days, and now they had returned together in such an intimate manner. When she saw the two of them standing side by side, Ning Shuemo felt as if her heart had been stabbed by a knife. She clenched her fists tightly in her sleeves. She had the urge to rush forward and tear the two of them apart violently. Shinjoli, did you really let Yunqi take advantage of you? It turns out that once you forget about me, you can also easily fall in love with someone else. Ning Shuemo's gaze landed on Yunqi, and a murderous look flashed across her eyes. This woman is so despicable. She probably really told Shinjoli that she was his fiancée when he woke up, and Shinjoli foolishly believed her. That's why he treated her so well. Then what was she? What was she now? What position did she occupy in Shinjoli's heart? Did he really treat her as his disciple? At that moment, Ning Shuemo's heart seemed to surge like a tide, and her entire body stiffened. Shiju immediately sensed her abnormal reaction, and he subconsciously turned his head to look in the direction Ning Shuemo was looking. He was slightly startled. He still recognized the Dizun's signature outfit. He hurriedly pulled Ning Shuemo, who was frozen in place, and knelt down in front of Shinjoli. Greetings to the Dizun. When he saw that Ning Shuemo was still standing there without any intention of bowing, he couldn't help but tug at her again. Shuemo, quickly pay your respects to your master. Ning Shuemo raised her head and looked at Shinjoli, who was looking at her expressionlessly. Anger, disappointment, sadness, pain. Her heart was filled with all kinds of emotions. She felt as if 100 bottles had been knocked over. Master, he had really become her master now. If nothing else, he would only treat her as his disciple. Shinjioli and Yunshi stood in midair like gods overlooking all living things. Ning Xuema couldn't help but smile. Sure enough, she bowed to him and said, "Master, this disciple greets Master." Shinjioli's gaze landed on her and Shijue's hands that were holding each other's hands. His eyes seemed to be filled with frost as he reprimanded, "Ning Xuema, who allowed you to leave the mountain without permission? She even dressed up like this to have a private rendezvous with a man here." Looking at their expressions, Ning Xuema and this pretty boy obviously had a close relationship. The icy aura around Shinjioli was so cold that it could freeze people within a radius of 3 miles. Ning Xuema was also enraged. What? Only the officials were allowed to set fires, but the common people were not allowed to light lamps. She raised her head and laughed softly. "Master, which rule of the Sun-Moon sect doesn't allow disciples to leave the mountain?" For some reason, Shinjioli saw that Ning Xuema's smile was especially dazzling. His voice was even colder. "The 18th rule of the Sun-Moon sect states that disciples of the Sun-Moon sect are not allowed to leave the mountain as they wish within 3 years of being apprenticed to a master. If they leave the mountain, they must obtain the approval of their master. Otherwise, they will be punished for absconding." The punishment for absconding was usually to cripple their cultivation and expel them from the sect. Ning Xuema simply wanted to laugh. "Master, are you trying to expel me from the sect again?" Shinjioli choked. He was about to say something else when Ning Xuema continued, "However, Master, you've probably forgotten that according to the rules of the Sun-Moon sect, disciples of the Sun-Moon sect are indeed not allowed to leave the mountain as they wish within 3 years of being apprenticed to a master. However, that's only for disciples whose psychokinesis is below Earth rank level 4. Also, Xuema became the ancestor's disciple 10 years ago. The 3-year limit has already been reached. Therefore, whether it's my psychokinesis level or the number of years I've been apprenticed to a master, I haven't violated any of the rules of the Sun-Moon sect." Shinjioli, his gaze darkened. This girl actually dared to argue with him in front of his face, and even had such a righteous look on her face. Chapter 1250. Shiju was also shocked. He didn't expect that Ning Xuema would dare to speak to the Overlord like that. He saw that the Overlord's gaze was unkind and was afraid that he would punish Ning Xuema. He steeled his heart and said, "Overlord, it was I who invited Miss Ning here. It has nothing to do with her. If the Overlord wants to punish someone, don't punish her. Just punish Shiju." Shiju. The wise king's heir. Although Shinjioli had lost his original memories, he had been quietly understanding the situation of the mainland for the past 2 years. Naturally, he also knew some key people. He had heard of Shiju's name before. So this Shiju was an old friend of his disciple? His gaze was like ice as it swept across Shiju's face. Shiju felt as if he had been scraped by a cold knife when he was swept by his gaze. All the hair on his body stood on end. However, he was also a responsible person. The colder Shinjioli's expression and the stronger his aura, the more worried he was for Ning Xuema. He simply took a step forward and completely blocked Ning Xuema behind him to protect her. "Momo, do you think the great god will kill Shiju? His aura doesn't seem right. He might really kill him." The little loli in Ning Xuema's mind began to gloat again. Ning Xuema's heart sank. She didn't want Shiju to die here, so she simply walked out from behind Shiju and blocked Shiju behind her. "Master, Shiju and I met by chance. It wasn't an appointment. I wanted to go down the mountain on my own accord." Their small actions naturally fell into Shinjioli's eyes. It also made the aura around him even colder and stronger. That coldness made Yunshi, who was beside him, shiver uncontrollably. She looked at Ning Xuemo. If Shiju didn't call out Ning Xuemo's name, she really wouldn't have recognized her. Ning Xuemo used an ordinary disguise technique, not a spell. Logically speaking, Shinjiuli should not have recognized her at first sight. However, when he passed by the sky above this place, he suddenly brought her down. This gave Yunxi a fright. She thought that he had discovered something strange, but all she saw was two men tugging at each other. This continent didn't forbid romantic relationships. Yunxi had lived for a long time, so she would occasionally see couples. However, such a scene wasn't too exciting for her. At that time, she didn't quite understand Shinjuli's thoughts. She didn't expect that Shinjiuli would be interested in gay love. Shijue looked at Ning Xuemo, who was standing in front of him, and felt touched. It wasn't a coincidence. I've been looking for you for 10 years, Xuemo. At the same time, he slowly walked out from behind Ning Xuemo and stood side by side with her. He held her hand and pulled her forward. Ning Xuemo subconsciously wanted to pull her hand away, but Shijue's grip was too strong. She didn't succeed for a moment. At that moment, she heard Shijue say in a clear voice, Dizun, Xuemo and I are congenial and have fallen in love at first sight. I hope that Dizun will grant me a marriage. I will definitely treat Xuemo well. I will only love her for the rest of my life. I will shelter her from the wind and rain and protect her forever. He was proposing to her. Ning Xuemo felt a little dizzy. She really didn't expect Shijue to be so daring. Shinjuli's expression became colder and colder. The cold air around his body was almost solidifying. He looked at Ning Xuemo, the coldness in his eyes terrifying. What do you say? The moment Shijue opened his mouth, Ning Xuemo wanted nothing more than to block his mouth and pull her hand away. When she heard Shinjuli's question, she looked up and subconsciously wanted to explain. Just as she was about to say something, her gaze involuntarily fell on Yunxi and Shinjuli's tightly snuggled figures. Chapter 1251. Her gaze turned cold. What right did he have to question her? How did he manage to get so close to another woman and question her feelings? He even asked her to reply as if it was only natural. He had no right. Ning Xuemo pursed her lips and glanced at Shinjiuli without saying anything. She felt like she was going to freeze to death, but she still snuggled up to Shinjiuli tightly. She looked at Ning Xuemo with a hint of pride. Shinjiuli waited for her reply for a long time, so he became even angrier. His tone became even colder. Ning Xuemo, say something. Ning Xuemo looked at the two people who were snuggled up to each other like fairies. The fire in her heart burned even brighter, but her heart seemed to have been frozen into a lump of ice. Her breathing was icy cold. The corners of her lips curled up, revealing an expression that wasn't a smile. What does Dizun want me to say? Is it about my relationship problems? If you're questioning me as my master, I'm sorry, but I can only answer that this is a personal matter, and it's not convenient for me to disclose it. Shinjiuli became even angrier after being choked by her. He looked at Shiju, who was beside her, and the murderous intent in his eyes could almost materialize. He had never been so angry before. For thousands of years, he had been indifferent and aloof like a god. He had never been so angry like a human. His tone was even a little scary. Ning Xuemo, I'm your master. Do I have no right to ask about your private matters? No one has ever dared to speak to me like this. Very well, he was putting on airs with her now. Ning Xuemo was as angry as she was calm on the surface. She faced Shinjuli's monstrous anger directly and said expressionlessly, Dizun, please forgive me. You have no right to ask. Especially when he was intimately holding on to another woman. Snowflakes drifted down in sheets, becoming more and more rapid. The ground quickly turned silvery white at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, the snowflakes covered the sky and covered the earth, almost drowning everyone. Yunxi looked at the storm-like weather in astonishment. Then, she looked at Shinjuli's ice-cold face with a complicated look in her eyes. It was a sunny day just now, but now it was as cold as the dead of winter. Shinjuli's voice was even colder than this. No right to ask. As long as you are my disciple, I have the right to ask about everything you do. Ning Xuema raised her eyes and glanced at him without saying anything. Jiuli, the two of them are in love with each other and their hearts are connected. As their master, why don't you fulfill their wishes? Yunxi said in a gentle voice. It's a wonderful thing. Ning Xuema glanced coldly at Yunxi, as though she had seen through her thoughts. Her voice was indifferent but incomparably cold. Shut up. You have no right to ask about my business. She almost couldn't control herself from scolding Yunxi. However, in the end, she restrained herself. If she cursed now, it would only make her seem uncultured and make Yunxi seem pure and generous. As the snow got heavier, Shinjuli's voice was bone-chilling. Ning Xuema, is this how you speak to your elders? Apologize. He was cold and emotionless as his voice reverberated between heaven and earth. It echoed in Ning Xuema's ears like thunder and replayed over and over again. Apologize. 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 He wanted her to apologize to Yunxi again. The last time she hadn't apologized, he had locked her up for one night. If she didn't apologize this time, was he going to kick her out of the sect? Chapter 1252. If she apologized to Yunxi, then who should apologize to her? Shinjuli, amnesia isn't a reason for you to hurt me and humiliate me. It's also not a reason for you to support Yunxi and whisper sweet nothings to each other with a clear conscience. Ning Xuema was so angry that she laughed instead. There was a ball of fire burning in her heart, so much so that she almost wanted to kill Yunxi. Her rationality was stretched taut like a string that was constantly pulled taut and could break at any time. She grabbed Shijue's hand and turned to leave. After taking a few steps, her feet were suddenly bound and she couldn't take another step forward. This trick again. Ning Xuema clenched her fists so tightly that her fingernails dug deep into her palms. The string called reason was pulled taut and finally snapped. She turned around and looked at the two people in the sky with a smile that was not a smile. Her eyes were ice-cold, as cold as the ice and snow of the South Pole. She raised her hand to catch a snowflake and a flame suddenly rose from her palm. The snowflake evaporated in the fire and made a sizzling sound. Ning Xuema's eyes seemed to flash with a red light, but it was impossible to see clearly in the heavy snow. She opened her mouth and said in a voice full of ridicule, Dizun, you want to ask me if I'm willing to marry Shijue, right? Shinjuli held his breath, but he couldn't help but wait for her answer. Shijue glanced at Ning Xuema beside him and found that her expression was terrifyingly cold. Ning Xuema curled her lips slightly and raised a cold smile, reporting to Dizun. I'm willing. As if the stop button had been pressed, the heavy snow suddenly stopped. The snowflakes that filled the sky stayed motionless in the air. Shinjuli's voice was terrifyingly gloomy, you're willing. Thunder rumbled and purple lightning shuttled through the clouds. Ning Xuema's smile deepened and she said mockingly, yes, I'm willing. I hope Dizun will agree. The snowflakes that filled the sky finally came crashing down. The heavy snow swirled in the air and blurred people's vision. The wind howled, thunder rumbled, and lightning flashed. Shinjuli's anger had reached a critical point. He glanced at Ning Xuema and Shi Jue one last time before leaving in a huff. His cold voice could be heard in the wind, "Up to you." Ning Xuema looked at Shinjuli's receding figure and sat on the ground weakly. Shi Jue subconsciously wanted to pull her up, but Ning Xuema waved her hand and continued to sit on the ground without moving. Her eyes were lowered and no one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, Ning Xuema's heart was filled with anger, annoyance, unwillingness, pain and other negative emotions. Red light flashed in her drooping eyes, but her long eyelashes blocked Shi Jue's line of sight. He could only see Ning Xuema sitting on the ground expressionlessly, like a puppet that had lost all its strength. "Momo, he won't want you anymore. He doesn't want you anymore." The little loli finally seized the opportunity to speak. Her words stabbed Ning Xuema's heart. Ning Xuema sat silently, but the red light in her eyes was getting brighter and brighter. Her expression was getting colder and colder. "He doesn't want you anymore, so you don't want him anymore. Become a demon. Become a demon, Momo. After becoming a demon, no one in the world will dare to betray you. You can kill all the people who betray you." The little loli guided her patiently. Ning Xuema's heart was filled with rage. Her body seemed to have a faint red light flashing by. Becoming a demon. Becoming a demon. Shi Jue looked at Ning Xuema, who was becoming more and more indifferent. He couldn't help but feel uneasy. He asked with concern, "Xuema, what's wrong with you?" Shi Jue's voice was like the morning bell and evening drum, startling her. Chapter 1253. Shi Jue's voice was like the morning bell and the evening drum, startling her. She had almost turned into a demon. Ning Xuema's heart sank. The red light in her eyes finally faded, and her eyes returned to their original black color. She looked up and smiled weakly at Shi Jue. "I'm fine." Shi Jue heaved a sigh of relief and pulled her up. He looked at her with a youthful gaze. "Xuema, before this, you..." Ning Xuema looked at Shi Jue's expectant gaze and closed her eyes weakly. When she opened them again, they were clear. She said seriously, "Shi Jue, I'm sorry. Just now, Dizun and I were just venting our anger, but I used you as a shield." The meaning in her words was very clear. She was telling him not to think too much. Shi Jue's eyes darkened. He lowered his eyes and said, "It's fine." Ning Xuema stood up and looked at Buddha Lotus Mountain behind her. She smiled bitterly. She definitely wouldn't return to Buddha Lotus Mountain now. Firstly, they had just finished quarreling. If she ran back now, would she be asking for peace? Secondly, Yinshi must be there. She didn't know how close she was with Shinjuli right now. Even if she went back, she would only suffer from internal injuries from anger. When she thought of this, she only felt her heart begin to surge again. Negative emotions began to rush over again. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and tried hard to suppress the violent emotions in her heart. Shi Jue looked at Ning Xuema with a trace of heartache in his heart. Although she looked indifferent, he could feel the indistinct sadness around her. He shouldn't have been so impulsive to propose to her in front of Dizun. His momentary hot-headedness had caused Ning Xuema and Dizun to have a fierce quarrel. Dizun might even expel Xuema from his sect. Shi Jue felt the guilt in his heart grow heavier. He never regretted proposing to Ning Xuema, but he regretted choosing such a time. Although Xuema was trying her best to appear calm, she must be very sad in her heart. Shi Jue looked at Ning Xuema with a gaze full of guilt. He wanted to hold Ning Xuema's hand but gave up in the end. His voice was full of guilt. "Xuema. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have proposed to you at this time." Ning Xuema looked back and saw his guilty face. She sighed in her heart. She should be the one apologizing. She only treated him as a friend, but she used him as a shield and said that she wanted to marry him, making him happy for nothing. Looking at his loving gaze, Ning Xuemo felt a headache coming on. Shijue's sincere feelings, she really couldn't repay him. Ning Xuemo sighed, Shijue, it's not your fault. She could only blame the heavens for making fun of her. Ning Xuemo took a few steps forward and looked around. For a moment, she didn't know where to go. The world was so big, but there was no place for her to stay. Shijue looked at her back and suddenly felt a kind of fear in his heart. He hurriedly took a few steps forward and stood side by side with Ning Xuemo. He turned his head and asked, Xuemo, where are you going next? Ning Xuemo's heart was at a loss. After a long time, she finally remembered the reason why she went down the mountain. I want to find the little Qilin. When I went missing, it went out to look for me. Right now, I don't know where it is. I want to find it and bring it back. Ning Xuemo muttered a few words. Finally, she managed to temporarily suppress the emotions in her heart. She wanted to find Kirin, but where to find it? After finding it, where would the master and servant go? Chapter 1254. But where would she find him? After she found him, where would the master and servant go? Ning Xuemo's heart was at a loss and she felt a sense of loss. It was as if she couldn't tell where she was going. She was like a small sail floating in the sea, unable to find her home. Go back to the demon palace. That's where you belong. Momo, the demon palace is where you truly belong. The little loli's dreamy voice floated into her mind. Ning Xuemo's mind unconsciously flashed with that gorgeous and extravagant palace. A sense of disgust appeared in her heart. She coldly said, no. The little loli stared blankly and didn't say anything. Ning Xuemo raised her eyes to look at the sky that had unknowingly become clear. Looking at the white clouds floating quietly in the sky, a sense of grandeur suddenly rose in her heart. The gloominess in her heart seemed to have dissipated by quite a bit. She, Ning Xuemo, had always been alone and laughed at the world. When did she start to care about whether she belonged to a place or not? She was a great rock that could soar 90,000 miles in the sky. She had always followed her heart's desires and followed her whims. She came and went as she pleased, free and unrestrained like the wind. Since when did her domineering and arrogant Ning Xuemo become so sentimental and haggling over every little thing, as if she was a little girl who was sad about autumn and sad about the moon? Love wasn't everything to her. Why did she have to make it seem like her entire world had collapsed? If you're heartless, I'll break up with you. This was Ning Xuemo's point of view on love. Ning Xuemo let out a long sigh of relief. It was as if she wanted to spit out all the gloominess in her heart. She decided that after she found Kirin, she would go far away and live a carefree and unrestrained life. The sky was high for the birds to fly, and the sea was wide for the fish to swim. She, Ning Xuemo, was a peerless genius. Why would she worry about not being able to find a place to go? What a joke. Ning Xuemo tried her best to comfort herself. Finally, she recovered the image of a carefree agent boss. At this moment, she felt herself being shaken. She turned around in confusion and saw Shijue's worried gaze. Xuemo, did you hear what I just said? Shijue had been talking to her for a long time, but there was no response at all. He turned his head in confusion, only to find that Ning Xuemo was calmly looking at the sky, the expression in her eyes changing rapidly. He called out to her several times, but she didn't hear him. He thought that she had accidentally lost her hearing, and in his panic, he couldn't help but shake her. What did he just say? Ning Xuemo secretly frowned. Oh no, she was too immersed in her own emotions. She directly ignored Shijua's words. This was not a good sign. On the battlefield, one would lose their life if they were distracted, let alone being so focused. She looked at Shiju. Shiju, what did you just say? I'm sorry, I was distracted just now. Shiju heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that she was fine. Moreover, her current state seemed to be much better than before. She had regained her confidence. Shiju said loudly, Shuama, I just said that I found Kirin a few days ago. It's trapped in a cave in the Fictional Kingdom's Valley of End. I accidentally broke in, but I couldn't save it even after using all my strength. I could only come out myself. This time, I came to the Sun Moon sect because I heard that you're back. I wanted to see you, and secondly, I wanted to ask for help from the Sun Moon sect. Kirin was trapped. Ning Xuema's heart sank. Now, there were countless sects eyeing Kirin. When they saw that Kirin was alone, they definitely couldn't help but want to take Kirin for themselves. Chapter 1255. However, the little Chilan's skill was also very high. It was not to be trifled with. Those people probably trapped the little Chilan there in order to exhaust its strength. Then, when it was out of strength, they would capture it. How sinister. Kirin was such a pure divine beast, it was not strange for it to fall into their trap. Now, she had to hurry to save Kirin and then beat up the person who wanted to use such a sinister method to possess Kirin. She did not waste time and quickly said, Shiju, bring me over. I can save Kirin. She was already at Earth stage level 8 and was a very powerful existence. Shiju nodded, okay. Ning Xuema waved her hand and an ordinary sword appeared in the air. She jumped on it and looked at Shiju, who was slightly surprised. Shiju, come up. Shiju's figure flashed and stood on the green sword. Ning Xuema pointed her finger and the sword flashed and rushed to the sky. Shiju looked at the white clouds that were retreating quickly and finally could not help but ask, Xuema, you're already at Earth stage level 7. Ning Xuema smiled, wrong, it's level 8. Genius, she was really a peerless genius. In 10 years, she had risen from 0 telekinesis to Earth rank level 8. Shiju sighed, Xuema, you're really a peerless genius in Tian-Ci continent. Tian-Ci continent had produced countless geniuses, but there had never been a peerless trash who rose all the way to Earth stage level 8. Some people might not be able to break through to the human stage in their lifetime, but she used less than 10 years to reach Earth stage level 8. Ning Xuema thought of the scene when she had just transmigrated and was chased everywhere to hide. She could not help but chuckle. Shiju, a scholar who has been away for 3 days, must be looked at with new eyes. She had always been proud and modesty was not faded with her. Of course, she was not blindly arrogant, but more of self-confidence. She was like a small shining object that unknowingly attracted people's attention. Shiju had seen many girls over the years, but none of them looked like her. He could not even find one that looked like her. Shiju looked at her back. Although it was a man's back, he seemed to be able to see the graceful figure of a woman. He was somewhat puzzled. Xuema, why did you disguise yourself? Could it be to escape down the mountain? Ning Xuema sighed, because there's a pervert who has his eyes on me and always wants to capture me. Shiju could not help but ask, Xuema, these 10 years, Shiju, 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 Shiju's, Shiju, Shiju, Ju, Ju, Ju. Shui Lan was very, very good to her. But he was good to her because he imprisoned her in a place like a captive. Therefore, Ning Xuema only felt disgust towards his kindness. She had no other feelings, she said it lightly, but Shiju, who was behind her, suddenly tensed up. Ning Xuema turned around and saw Shi Ju's angry and worried expression. He saw Ning Xuema turn around to look at him. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but stopped. Ning Xuema looked at his expression and knew what he wanted to ask. She smiled faintly. That pervert is okay with me, but he's been imprisoning me. Don't worry. Although he had been eyeing her covetously and wanted to pounce on her whenever he could, he did not let Shi Ju succeed. Shi Ju looked at her silently and did not speak. Being imprisoned for 10 years, Shi Ju felt a chill down his spine just thinking about it. Looking at Ning Xuema, who was still as calm and collected as before, he could not help but admire her mental fortitude. Her mental fortitude was really not ordinary.